Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow good stories. In the dimly lit room, a man slammed a wooden cane onto the floor and stomped his foot, shattering the silence. A large scar marred his face, but it was his fierce expression and pale skin like that of a corpse that struck fear into anyone who saw him. What's the matter? Is my ghastly appearance bothering you? Ah. The girl screamed in pain as he suddenly grabbed her wrist tightly. The man, filled with jealousy, snarled each word. So you dare to cheat on me, don't you? That Baron has you so infatuated, huh? Did he promise you something? What kind of future do you see with him? The girl struggled weakly to resist. Look at what you're doing, she cried. The man hissed. Madelyn, no matter how much you change, you and I are still husband and wife. Madelyn's tears of despair fell as she sneered. Husband? Do you think you have the right to call yourself my husband? You've never treated me like a wife. Just end it all. Her scream only enraged him further as he tightened his grip on her wrist, causing her even more pain. Do you love him that much? He demanded. Medalin cried out, let me go. The man's eyes grew even more menacing. You will never escape from me. Even if you die and this cursed mansion crumbles to the ground, you will not leave. Medalin struggled desperately. Why are you treating me like this? What have I done wrong? I don't want to stay here for another second. I can't spend the rest of my life being trapped like a ghost in this place. Don't you dare try to stop me. In a moment of carelessness due to her anger, Medalin didn't notice the stairs in front of her and fell headlong down. In that instant, thoughts of her husband's suspicions about her infidelity resurfaced. If I could even consider something as luxurious as love, it would only be for revenge, not affection. Revenge on the man who has imprisoned me here, letting me wither away. Revenge on Nottingham. Suddenly, everything around her went silent. I had thought my death would bring an end to it all. I've lived in this hell on earth for 6 long years, but in the end, I'm left with the reputation of a treacherous wife, full of disgrace. In her final moments, the last image Medalyn saw was her husband weeping in despair. But inside, she felt an overwhelming satisfaction. Medalyn smirked bitterly. Even in my last moments, I could make you feel such despair. That's satisfaction enough for me. One morning at the magnificent Renfield Manor, birds chirped outside the balcony, basking in the bright sunlight. Everything was full of life, and Medalyn found herself back to her girlhood at the age of 17. As a maid combed Madelyn's hair, she asked, My lady hasn't been well these past few days. Everyone's worried that your health might deteriorate. Madelyn, flipping through a newspaper, replied, I'm fine, thank you. The maid, who had always taken care of Madelyn, knew her mistress's temperament well. A few days ago, she had been laughing and then crying, her mood unpredictable. Yet today, she was suddenly calm and even reading the newspaper. But Madelyn was merely confirming if everything was real. The newspaper read the year 1914, the time when her misfortunes began. After her mother's death, she and her father had lived happily together. However, her father was always lost in the luxury of a gentleman's lifestyle. She herself wore silk dresses and cared for nothing else in the world. But that wealthy life didn't last long. In just one night, all their assets were wiped out due to her father's failed business ventures, and he chose the most extreme way to end his life. In the will he left behind, there wasn't a single word addressed to his daughter. Thus, Madelyn left with nothing but empty hands and later married the Earl of Nottingham, a man she had never met. This marriage could have been a miraculous salvation for the young girl, but then war broke out, ravaging both his face and soul. In the end, the two of them plunged each other into the abyss of despair, and their marriage ended in tragedy. As Madelyn walked through the peaceful garden, she pondered silently. If I'm 17 this year, then the disaster of losing all our assets isn't far away. If I could stop father from investing in that risky business venture, perhaps our future would change. But my foolish father is wandering all over Europe. When will he ever sit down to review his finances? What shocked me the most was that father didn't mention me at all in his will. Oh, Medalyn? Her father's voice snapped her back to reality. A father? Her father cheerfully continued, You came all the way out here to welcome me? How sweet of you. Come on, get in the carriage with me. Medalyn remained silent for a moment. She was still angry with him for always leaving her alone, but deep down, she still loved and missed her father. So, she vowed to herself that in this second life, she wouldn't miss any opportunity. I must find a way for father and me to survive, and most importantly, I should avoid getting involved with Ian Nottingham. Just as she was thinking this, a man who was both unfamiliar and familiar was already sitting in the carriage. Oh, today I invited a guest. Let me introduce you to my daughter, Lord Nottingham. The man looked at her with an indifferent and cold expression. On the way back to Renfield Manor, her father continuously chatted warmly with Ian, but he was only casually gazing out the window and responding politely. Medalin couldn't hide her confusion, because at this time in her previous life, Ian was supposed to be in London, not here. I heard that your risky business venture is progressing quite well. Truly, your business acumen is not to be underestimated. Madelyn looked at the man before her, unable to hide her discomfort. Could this really be Ian Nottingham? No way. Yan, in the previous life. Crash. The sound of a glass shattering echoed throughout the room, accompanied by Yan's angry shout, "I told you not to touch me." Madelyn, startled and trembling, hurriedly apologized. Aside from the long-serving attendants by his side, Yan didn't allow anyone to touch him, not even the wife who shared his bed. Back to the present, Madelyn still stared intently at the man named Yan, silently questioning. The man noticed her gaze fixed on him. Instead of calling out her unsettling behavior, he looked back at her with a slight smile. Madelyn tried to avoid his gaze, but although the man sitting opposite her was indeed Ian Nottingham, he didn't resemble the person she had once known. "I've heard that Lord Nottingham here is quite fond of horseback riding. Isn't that so?" He replied, "Yes, that's right. I'm very passionate about speed." Her father admired him greatly. "Truly, you have refined tastes." Hearing this, Madelyn became even more confused. Horseback riding? He's not crippled. Not yelling at me? This can't be the same person. She recalled her previous life when she was 22 years old. It was a day that any girl in the world would dream of. Seeing her anxious expression, the butler approached and asked, "Are you nervous, my lady?" Madelyn responded, "Yes." The butler reassured her, "He is a good man, so you need not worry." Madelyn spoke up, "I'm not scared. It's just that I'm not sure if I can be a good wife." At first, I didn't have any ill feelings toward Yan. Even though we married without love, I still hoped that our marriage would be happy. I promised myself I would become the guiding light for this deeply troubled man, would be faithful, heal him, and become a wise and admirable wife. But that small hope of mine was shattered on our wedding night. That night, Ian didn't come to their bedroom, not just on the first night, but every night after. When Madelyn tried to approach him, he ignored her completely, passing by like a breeze. Her dream world seemed to crumble entirely. Yan didn't even want to face her, not even once. The bitterness and loneliness within her only grew. "It seems you've forgotten that I exist, haven't you?" Ian didn't even glance at her, replying indifferently, "That's not true." His attitude only made Madelyn angrier. "I'm so tired of this," she said, her voice cold and angry. It was only then that Ian paid attention to her. The very next day, Ian sent her a gift, a golden-furred puppy that was trembling all over. Of course, he didn't give it to her directly. He had the butler bring it to her. Madelyn could only close her book in frustration. "He sent this puppy to keep me company?" Madelyn thought for a moment, then reached out to touch the puppy. Though it was clearly frightened and trembling, the puppy gently licked her fingers in greeting. Madelyn was instantly charmed. "You're as scared as I am," she thought as she cradled the puppy in her arms, finding some comfort in its presence. "We've arrived." Madelyn was startled back to reality by her father's booming voice. The butler respectfully greeted the owner of the estate. He seemed very excited to be home, especially with a new guest. "Madelyn, why don't you show Lord Nottingham around the estate while we wait?" Madelyn tried to avoid it. "Father, I'm not feeling well." "Oh, well, how about you play a piano piece for us while we enjoy tea?" "I'm sorry, I'd like to rest." Her father became flustered, but our honored guest, Ian, interrupted him. "It's all right." Ian bowed politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you, my lady." Madelyn calmly apologized and asked for his understanding. The man named Ian Nottingham was right in front of her, but this was the Ian from before misfortune had struck. Whenever those memories surfaced in her mind, she found herself wondering if she should intervene in his fate. Perhaps his life could be happier. Thinking of this, Madelyn quickly dismissed the thought and sighed helplessly. "Haven't you suffered enough, Madelyn? Your fate is already sealed. Don't repeat the same mistakes. It'll be better for both of you. If this is to be our final fleeting encounter, I should have run away in the previous life. That would have been the best way to avoid any further TIs with him. In her private room, Madelyn was reviewing land documents, trying to plan financially before the war began. But if I can't stop father from pouring money into risky ventures, soon enough, we'll both be on the streets, begging for food. Just as she was wondering what to do, there was a knock on the door. Madelyn, may I come in? Of course, father. I was just about to come find you. Her father handed her a letter. This is an invitation for you from London. I don't think this is the right time to make an appearance in high society, Madelyn sighed. She had no desire to attend any lavish parties. Do I have to go, father? Madelyn's father was taken aback by her expression. My darling daughter, you're not happy? I mean, all you do is read newspapers and scold me for spending money. Don't you want to get married anymore? Madelyn calmly replied, I never said that, father. Her father grew more anxious. If you don't want to socialize with the upper class, it's the same as not wanting to get married. I've even bought a townhouse in London for us to move into 1.at this. Madelyn finally spoke seriously. Since you mentioned it, father, I must say, you should sell that house. Her father's face immediately turned pale. Madelyn, don't talk nonsense like that. Madelyn continued, and father, you should stop investing in the wine business. Her father was taken aback. How do you know about that? He suddenly changed his tone. Don't tell me you've been reading all my letters? That's outrageous. It's shameful. Stay out of my business dealings. This is not appropriate for a lady like you. Madelyn maintained her cold demeanor. Father, if you continue to pour money into the wine business, I will never set foot in high society, nor will I consider marriage. Her father could only shout in frustration, Madelyn, but she just smiled brightly and declared she wouldn't hesitate to become a nun for the rest of her life. Her father, now trembling with anger, confined Madelyn to her room to reflect on her behavior. However, a few days later, she was still dragged to London to attend the ball. Are you sure you've burned all those contracts, father? She asked. Her father responded nervously. I'm sure. You've been keeping an eye on me the whole time, haven't you? Madelyn questioned him further. You didn't keep any copies, did you? He replied hesitantly, Of course not. Why would I deceive you? Please, just let it go. But, aren't you planning to dance with anyone? You've turned down 6 suitors already. Why? Madelyn responded warily. I just don't know. Her attitude left her father flustered. Madelyn, as a member of the Renfield family, it's your duty to marry a wealthy man and support our family. I truly don't understand you, my daughter. Madelyn sighed and thought to herself, these lavish parties will be destroyed by war anyway. I don't want to act like a beautifully dressed puppet anymore. This time, I want to choose my own future. I want to find the right path, as long as it gets me away from that inevitable downfall. Perhaps I should continue studying piano. I've heard that women will be able to find jobs when the war ends. Maybe someday I would like to have a job too. Madelyn was lost in thought when someone approached her. These kinds of parties don't seem to suit you, do they, Miss Renfield? Madelyn's eyes widened in surprise. Nottingham. She quickly turned her face away. Not at all. It's just, don't you see? See what, Miss Nottingham? Yan asked, confused. How everyone is still so cheerful with each other, Madelyn replied. That's what's worrying. No one knows what the future holds. Yan smiled brightly. True. We can't know what will come our way. We can't even guess. So why don't we just enjoy this moment while we still can? Even if you refuse to enjoy it, it won't stop what's bound to happen. So, why not relax? Madelyn hesitated, but the tragedies of war still haunted her. I am relaxed, she said. Yan was puzzled by her conflicted expression. I just find these kinds of parties to be a waste of time, that's all, she added. Yan, intrigued, responded. I don't mean to say that parties are meaningless, nor am I criticizing those who are dancing over there. It's just that this isn't what I want. Yan smiled slightly. And what if what you want is to dance with me, Miss Renfield? Madelyn's eyes widened. What? Yan courteously extended an invitation. Miss Madelyn Renfield, may I have this dance? Madelyn's eyes grew wide. I have no obligation to save anyone, and certainly no obligation to save Yan. She had already decided to use this second chance at life to avoid Nottingham. The further away, the better. But if nothing changes, Yan will have to join the war and go through those terrible experiences. They will devastate both his body and soul. If this future deviates just a little, it wouldn't be so bad, would it? If the rest of his life could be even a little happier, maybe I should give him some advice. A few minutes earlier, a man had spoken in a mocking tone. Look at her, he said. The man sitting across from him frowned slightly. There are tons of ladies here. Which one are you talking about? The man gestured in one direction and continued. I've been counting how many dance invitations she's rejected. 6, at least 6 men have been turned down by her. Hearing his friends grumbling, Yen followed his gaze and recognized a familiar face. Ah, isn't that the daughter of the Baron? How interesting. I've already run into her again. While Yan was musing to himself, his 2 friends continued their conversation. Should I go over and talk to her? One of them asked. The other quickly held him back. Forget it. You don't even know who she is. That's inappropriate. This isn't the Victorian era anymore. What's inappropriate about talking to a girl? Just watch. I'll go over there and, before he could make a move, a hand pressed him back down. Yan, effortlessly cool, walked over first. The other man, frustrated at being outmaneuvered, grumbled. Hey. His friend sighed in amazement. I never thought I'd see the day when Nottingham would approach a girl on his own. Amidst the soft music, 2 young ladies whispered to each other. Hey, they've danced together for times already. Who is that girl dancing with Lord Nottingham? It seems she's just a lady from some countryside estate. Yin suddenly spoke up. Miss Madelyn Renfield, are you all right? Madelyn, confused, replied, yes? What do you mean? Yin continued, your hand is trembling. Only then did Madelyn notice the trembling of her hands. She anxiously searched for an explanation but couldn't find any. And again Ian remarked, the way you're looking at me, it's as if you're pitying me. A heavy silence enveloped them. Madelyn thought, should I tell him? Or should I let him go and never look back? Lost in her thoughts, Madelyn accidentally bumped into another lady who was dancing nearby. The lady exclaimed, Miss Renfield, be careful. The lady's rose-shaped hairpin suddenly fell to the ground after the collision. Madelyn reflected, if fate has brought us together once more, then maybe I will have to endure lonely days and an unhappy life. But what should I do? When Madelyn was 26, she loved tending to her rose garden and soon realized that someone had plucked the beautiful roses she had painstakingly cared for. Madelyn pondered, who could have done this? Everyone here knew how carefully Madelyn had tended to the garden. She turned to question the dog. Corey, did you do this? The dog cheerfully barked, as if proclaiming his innocence. Madelyn sighed. I guess it wasn't you, huh? You could chew the flowers, but how could you neatly pluck them like that? The dog, hearing this, happily agreed. Madelyn continued, but whoever picked the flowers, I just hope my flower could bring them a little bit of joy, right, Corey? Just then, the sound of footsteps approached. A man's cold voice spoke. Go inside, Madelyn. Madelyn shouted. But what about Corey? Ian coldly responded. Forget about it. It's just an animal. Getting a cold just because you're looking for a dog? That's ridiculous. Madelyn spat back through clenched teeth. How could you say that? You're the one who brought him to me. In this entire mansion, he's the only one who truly cares about me. Ian grabbed her shoulders and commanded in a deep voice, Madelyn, go inside. Madelyn became desperate. She could only stand there, frozen, staring at her husband in the pouring rain. Miss Renfield, are you all right? Ian asked. Madelyn brushed his hand away and responded, yes, I'm fine. She then lifted her skirt and excused herself. It was a pleasure dancing with you, Lord Nottingham. Have a good evening, she said. Ian wanted to call her back, but Madelyn quickly walked away. He stroked his chin and muttered, she didn't change her tone after for dances. I'm a bit disappointed. A little later, the servants brought out delicious dishes to serve the distinguished guests. Madelyn couldn't believe she was dragged into the dining table, and to make matters worse, she was seated directly across from Lord Nottingham. Already in no mood to eat, she had to witness this quarrel between the Nottingham siblings. Isabelle snapped. How could you say that? Stop making a scene. Ian retorted. Lower your voice, Isabelle. It's no wonder you were deceived by that scoundrel. Isabelle became even more agitated. She retorted, making a scene? What do you mean, scoundrel? Madelyn thought to herself. So, this is Isabelle Nottingham. In my previous life, When I married Ian, he no longer had any family left in this world. His younger brother, Eric, had volunteered for the battlefield and died, while his younger sister, Isabelle, had been killed in a car accident before the war even broke out. There were rumors that it was a premeditated accident. It seemed that at the time, she was in a relationship with a man from a lower class. Unable to endure the social prejudices, they decided to die together. That day, I thought that Ian might not have worn that sorrowful expression if his two siblings were still alive. After Isabelle's death, Ian never touched her belongings and kept everything in place, so they would always remind him of his regrets and inner desires. Madelyn remembered, when she was 22, she had once touched Isabelle's late piano without permission. The room had no trace of dust, which showed that the servants had been cleaning it regularly. She thought, how much must a brother miss his sister to do such things? While lost in thought, she noticed something on the floor. Is that a photograph? It was a picture of Lady Isabelle, but she didn't recognize the man beside her. Above the photo were the words, "For the one my heart cherishes, G. Cherry Milov." Madelyn thought, maybe it fell out from behind this. As she was about to put the photo back, she discovered that the sheet music was all handwritten. Next to it, there were many more pictures of the two of them together. Madelyn realized, I understand now. Isabelle wrote these pieces for her lover. I heard he was a socialist, but I don't know much about politics. Isabelle Nottingham. What kind of person was she really? Was she a delicate and elegant person who loved playing the piano? Or was she a vibrant and passionate soul who could die for love? Whatever the case may be, the sound of the piano she once played must have enveloped this gloomy mansion in a warm and bright embrace. If Lady Isabelle were still alive, perhaps Ian wouldn't have. Suddenly, the door was forcefully flung open by a man, startling Madelyn, who stood there, still trying to comprehend what was happening. Ian, she called out, noticing his whole body trembling as he growled, "Get out." Now, Madelyn, who had grown accustomed to being pushed away, couldn't hold back her anger and retorted, "Ian, I'm your wife. If you have any respect for me, you owe me an explanation as to why." Before she could finish her sentence, Ian cut her off. Never enter this room again. Back then, Madelyn thought he deeply loved his sister, but in reality, the two of them had been arguing endlessly. Crash. Something suddenly shattered. Isabelle stood up angrily and screamed at her brother, "You're the real scoundrel here." She grabbed her hat and prepared to leave. Ian called out, "Isabelle, where are you going? Sit down." Isabelle snapped back, "I'm done here. I can't even breathe around you. I don't want to live in a place like this anymore." Every word Isabelle uttered brought back memories from Madelyn's past life. Wait a minute, today is the day Isabelle dies. As soon as this thought crossed her mind, Madelyn quickly stood up and excused herself from the table. The moment the thought crossed her mind, Madelyn hurriedly stood up and excused herself from the table. "I'll be right back," she said. Her friend, left behind, lamented her sudden departure. Meanwhile, Ian was silently watching her from afar. No sooner had Madelyn left the banquet than she called out, "Miss Isabelle." When Isabelle turned back, her eyes were already brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, but I have to go," Isabelle said. Madelyn stopped her. "Please, wait a moment. Are you going to meet your lover?" Isabelle froze in place. "What? Have you been eavesdropping on our conversation?" she asked, startled. Madelyn shook her head. "No. It's not like that. Don't pretend otherwise. Women like you are just another victim of my brother's type. Do you think by doing this, he'll notice you?" Madelyn's voice grew louder. "You're going to meet Sir Milif, aren't you?" Isabelle's steps faltered, and her demeanor softened. How? How do you know him?" Isabelle asked, her voice trembling. "Don't worry," Madelyn reassured her. "I won't tell anyone. I don't even understand what socialism is." Isabelle, still skeptical, asked, "Aren't you a spy for your brother?" "Of course not," Madelyn replied calmly. "Sir Nottingham is polite but stubborn." At the mention of her brother, Isabelle retorted angrily, "Ha, I don't see any politeness in him." Madelyn continued, "And he's very good at controlling others." Isabelle, now somewhat embarrassed, but still frowning, remarked, "You seem to know him well." Madelyn responded gently, "I've been through this before, Isabelle. Don't let his stubbornness and controlling nature affect you. I was once trapped by a man like that, and my whole life was ruined. I even fled from his wrath." Madelyn recounted her past without fear of being drawn back into Ian's world. Her only desire was to save this girl, who was blinded by anger, leading her to a tragic end. Isabelle reminded her so much of the old Madelyn. It may seem hopeless now, but it's not. There are many other paths you haven't tried yet. Madelyn's heartfelt words seemed to touch Isabelle deeply. Isabelle, confused, pleaded for Madelyn to release her hand. In that moment, the two girls failed to notice a shadow approaching them. It was none other than Ian. Only then did they realize he had been watching them, their hands still clasped together. Ian frowned in suspicion. "This is a matter between me and my sister, so please." Before he could finish, Isabelle interrupted, shouting, "That's not true." She suddenly turned and asked, "What was your name again?" Madelyn blinked, answering unconsciously. "Madelyn," Isabelle shouted even louder. "I'm staying with Lady Renfield." Ian was growing increasingly frustrated with his sister's outbursts. "You're acting overly familiar with a lady you've just met," he reprimanded. Isabelle, now even more irritated, shot back, "We're having a conversation. Don't butt in." Ian, at a loss for words, became more agitated as he realized his usually stubborn sister was getting along with Lady Madelyn better than he ever had. Sighing deeply, he warned, "Remember, every action has consequences." Then, addressing both Isabelle and Lady Renfield, he added, "I don't know how you've come to know my sister, but meddling in someone else's family matters is never a good idea." Both women were left speechless. Isabelle, however, muttered under her breath, "Who does he think he is? My father, maybe?" Madelyn, on the other hand, stood frozen, anger welling up inside her. "I knew it," she thought. "He didn't even thank me for stopping his sister." The next morning, Madelyn unfolded the newspaper. Around this time in her previous life, every headline was about Isabelle's death. But today, there was nothing. Madelyn silently thanked the heavens as she leaned back, reflecting, "In my past life, no one stopped Isabelle." Madelyn recalled the last time Ian had seen his sister, storming through her door after hearing the piano coming from Isabelle's room. She had witnessed the tears Ian had tried so hard to hold back but couldn't. So that's why, she thought, remembering how shortly after, Ian had gifted her a piano. Perhaps it was his way of apologizing, but that didn't matter anymore. Now, she had other things to focus on, like the upcoming social gathering at the estate of the Con family. As Madelyn scanned the guest list, wondering if Ian would be attending, she felt a sudden tap on her shoulder. "Lady Madelyn Renfield," said a familiar voice. It was the same gentleman from the other night, his interest in her apparent. Reluctantly, she joined him. At least with Ian absent, she could enjoy a conversation with the other gentleman more freely. Might as well, she thought. The man, as smooth-talking as ever, led her to a private seat. "Ah, Lady Renfield, have you ever visited the city before? It's incredibly modern and truly magnificent. I think it would suit someone like you perfectly." Madelyn nodded politely, though her thoughts were elsewhere. "He's trying to impress me, but I know that the city he's boasting about will soon be torn apart by war." The man was about to hand her the drink when someone suddenly snatched it away. "I didn't even realize," he exclaimed. "Do you really think that, Ian?" Ian, arriving later than expected, replied with a playful tone. "You're late," the man called out to him. Nearby, a couple was whispering to each other. "Oh my, isn't that the Nottingham family?" "Yes, Lord George is a classmate of Lord Nottingham," one of them confirmed. Meanwhile, Madelyn could hardly believe that Ian had shown up today, and trailing behind him was his younger brother, Eric. Isabelle was also there, seated directly across from her. The moment Isabelle spotted Madelyn, she instantly became guarded. Eric, cheerful as ever, chimed in. "I don't believe humanity will continue to develop in peace." Ian added, "Humans are selfish creatures by nature. We are driven by competition and destruction. Ironically, that's what has fueled our progress throughout history." "So you're saying military power leads to this development?" someone asked. "Well, reforms often come with violence," Ian replied. Everyone was so absorbed in the discussion that no one noticed Isabelle had slipped away. George, in good spirits, joined in. "But do you really think there will be a war soon? The world has never seen such parallel growth in both economy and development." "Oh, I disagree," Ian said firmly. "If necessary, another war will break out." Madelyn looked at him with concern. Sensing her gaze, Ian turned to her and asked, "Lady Renfield, what do you think of all this?" Startled, Madelyn looked at him with a complex expression before speaking. "About the development of humanity? Well, I do agree that military forces often drive innovation. But even if that's true, can one truly justify the deaths and suffering that people must endure in the name of progress? Ian, unfazed, replied, "You make a fair point, Lady Renfield. But because some believe that force is necessary for progress, wars have always broken out." A heavy silence enveloped the two of them. Ian then smiled faintly. "I see. So, that's your perspective, Lady Renfield." Madelyn, confused, glanced around and noticed that everyone was staring at her as if she were an oddity. She felt out of place among the group of men. The atmosphere was unbearably heavy. "Did I speak too bluntly?" she wondered. Eric broke the silence with a laugh. "I don't think I can keep up with all this political talk anymore. Oh, by the way, is anyone going to see the Winbowen tennis tournament this year?" George eagerly joined in, shifting the conversation. Madelyn, feeling utterly out of place, quietly excused herself while everyone else continued their lively discussion. Unbeknownst to her, Ian had been observing her every move, watching her retreating figure as she walked towards the door. He smiled, seemingly satisfied. Outside, Madelyn found herself questioning her conscience. Did I really need to oppose Ian so directly? She thought, but strangely enough, he hadn't seemed upset, quite the opposite in fact. He appeared amused by it all. Suddenly, Madelyn spotted Isabelle with another man. She immediately recognized him as the one in the photograph with her. That must be her lover, Madelyn mumbled, watching them. They look so happy together, and she's even willing to die for him. I wish I could have such romantic experiences. Lady Renfield? A familiar voice called her name. It was Lord Nottingham. Ian, he spoke up. May I have a word with you? Madelyn hesitated. If he came any closer, he would surely spot Isabelle. In a split second, she ran over to Ian. Taken aback, Ian instinctively blushed and cleared his throat. I've been wanting to talk about what happened last time, he began. Last time? Madelyn repeated. You mean about Isabelle? Yes, Ian admitted. I may have been too harsh on you. Madelyn stole a glance at the couple nearby and quickly responded. No, it's fine. I understand you're just concerned about her. She stepped aside, feeling the urgency to move away. He'll see Isabelle if I don't get him out of here, she thought. Shall we head back inside? She suggested. Noticing her odd behavior, Ian hesitated before speaking again. You confuse me, Lady Renfield. Lately, your coldness towards me has only drawn more of my attention. Madelyn felt both annoyed and flustered by his words. Do you think I look down on you? She asked. I don't know, Ian replied, clenching his hands. Maybe I'm just imagining things, but I do hope your disdain doesn't go beyond that. It wouldn't be good for our relationship. You never know what the future holds for us, do you? As the sun began to set, Ian continued, it's getting colder. We should head inside. Madelyn responded quickly. You just said we don't know what the future holds, like it's going to be something terrible. Take your time, Ian. I'd like to enjoy the scenery a little longer. Ian sighed. You really don't want to open up to me, do you? Very well. I'll respect your wishes for today, but I don't plan on giving up. Madelyn stood frozen, staring after him. At that moment, her thoughts wandered to the couple passionately together in the garden. If I were to compare our ill-fated connection to their fiery love, it would be laughable. Ian, someone who longs to be loved. They would surely laugh at him until they fell over. The man standing in front of her seemed like a shield against the wind. His shadow completely enveloped her. I can't let him give me hope, she thought. Madelyn recalled how, in her previous life, at the age of 25, she had often wondered how long she would live like this. Perhaps until she died. But then she thought about Corey, the dog. No one would care for him if I were gone, she thought. I can't entertain such dark thoughts. On the contrary, if Corey were to die, she wondered how long she would have to endure living in this hellish place. Madelyn was in her own house, yet she was far from happy. It felt as though she were a prisoner, sentenced to life. Suddenly, she stood up, startling Corey. The little dog looked at her with wide eyes, not understanding what his owner was about to do. Don't worry, my sweet Corey. You have nothing to fear, she whispered, reassuring him. The next morning, at the Nottingham estate, Ian had to pause his work upon hearing some unexpected news. What did you just say? What about my wife? He demanded. The butler, visibly uneasy, stammered. My lord, the lady. She left the estate last night. At a movie theater in London, Madelyn sat alone in a row of seats, enjoying the story on the screen. She had managed to escape that house. Her heart leaped with excitement, but she couldn't help but wonder how the servants were reacting. And what about Ian? How would he take it? Would he be relieved she was gone, or saddened by her absence? Madelyn looked back at the screen to watch the rest of the film, titled The Kid, a silent drama featuring Charlie Chaplin, telling the story of a man who raised a child abandoned by his mother, treating him like his own son. Madelyn was moved. That boy isn't even his son. How could he do so much for him? They aren't even related by blood, yet they've become a family. Tears welled up in her eyes as she watched Chaplin kiss the child and cradle him like his most precious treasure. Everyone in the theater, including Madelyn, was overcome with emotion. Returning to her rented house in London, she was greeted by her dog, who ran to her excitedly. She prepared some food for Corey and recounted the interesting moments from the film she had just seen. It was pure bliss, just the two of them, master and pet, free and unbound. But living independently for someone who had been accustomed to the luxuries of an estate wasn't easy. Where will I buy food for Corey? She wondered. And how will I wash this dirty dress? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. "Madam, a letter has arrived for you," said a voice from outside. Madelyn trembled as she took the letter. It had barely been a day since she left the estate, and yet someone already knew where she was. Nervously, she opened it and read the short message. "I'll wait for you at the train station. Ian, Nottingham." Just a few words, but they were enough to shatter the fragile sense of freedom she had built. "I thought everything would end once I ran away to London, but I was wrong." And yet, why did she feel a strange sense of relief? Back in the present, Madelyn gazed absent-mindedly at the people dancing in the room. Sleepy and wistful, she mused, is there really no way to live freely without the burden of inheritance or marriage? She sighed to herself. I should have memorized the top 10 stocks to invest in before I died. What a fool, I am more of a fool than a noblewoman. Madelyn, lost in her thoughts, slumped forward, but a hand caught her forehead. It was Ian. Madelyn instantly woke up, startled. "Oh, Lord Nottingham," she exclaimed. Ian spoke softly. "You seem tired these past few days. Perhaps the London air doesn't suit you." Madelyn replied, "The air in London is awful, but mostly it's because I've been staying up late to study." Ian looked surprised. "Studying? What are you learning? Ancient Greek?" Madelyn recalled her late nights battling through books and sighed. "Well, something close to that. I've been trying to figure out how to overcome an inevitable fate." Ian appeared puzzled, which made Madelyn feel embarrassed. "In short, I'm just trying to figure out how to endure it." Ian pondered this for a moment. "That's not the sort of thing a noble lady should be worrying about, Lady Renfield. My father used to enjoy spending time in London for leisure, after all." Realizing something, Ian quickly apologized. "Oh, I didn't mean to make light of your situation." "Don't worry, my lord," Madelyn reassured him. "I'm simply preparing for the worst-case scenario." Ian offered some advice. "You should consider having someone else handle this for you, rather than bearing it all yourself. Be more practical." Madelyn gave a faint smile. "I think most people would do just that." She paused and then looked down, her expression growing sadder. "But I want to live without depending on anyone." "Have you ever hated yourself so much that you started to despise others?" Ian, taken aback, stared at her with a puzzled expression. "Why would I hate myself?" he asked. Madelyn suddenly realized how ridiculous her words sounded, and she burst into laughter. Ian, witnessing the range of her emotions, blushed slightly as her laughter filled the room. "I apologize," she said between laughs. "I must seem terribly rude." Ian cleared his throat and turned his face away. "Not at all," Madelyn observed. "Your confidence is quite surprising, my lord." As they were conversing, the door to the room suddenly flew open, and George, the dark-skinned gentleman, rushed in with alarming news. "Lady Renfield, I mean, Madelyn, I deeply apologize, but Lord Renfield, your father, he's gone bankrupt." Madelyn's face paled as memories from her past life flooded back. Just like before, her father had thrown all his money into risky ventures and lost everything. The entire family fortune was gone. Madelyn hurried back to her family's estate, consumed with overwhelming worry. "Where's my father?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The maid, equally shaken, replied, my lady, he's in his room. He's been there since noon. But he ordered that no one should enter." Madelyn's face turned deathly pale. "No, it can't be. Father, please, no," she cried out as she burst through the door, calling for him. "Father." But there he was, sitting right in front of her, alive and well, his eyes wide with surprise at her sudden entrance. The maid, still panting from the earlier commotion, added, "Except for the butler, my lady." As the butler and maid left the room, Madelyn's father, clearly bewildered by his daughter's dramatic entrance, frowned. "You're causing such a fuss, Madelyn. Not very ladylike at all," he scolded. Ignoring his remark, Madelyn confronted him directly. "Father, what is this about bankruptcy? You told me you'd burn those contracts." Her father froze, his expression changing in an instant. Tears welled up in his eyes as he adopted a pitiful, fragile demeanor, trying to win his daughter's sympathy. "It's all my fault," he sobbed. "The company I invested in has gone bankrupt. I put everything we had into it." He suddenly grabbed her hand, and as he did, it was as if stars shimmered around him. "Madelyn, you're my only hope now." Madelyn sighed, relieved at least that her father was unharmed. "At least he's safe. I can help him in this life," she thought. She gently reassured him, "Don't worry, father. You're still here, and we'll get through this. First, let's sell the estate and the townhouse. Then we can work to pay off the rest of the debts." But before she could finish, her father's expression turned arrogant. "Nonsense. How could a nobleman like me work for a living?" Madelyn couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What did you just say?" she asked, incredulous. Her father continued, "I've heard that Lord Nottingham is quite taken with you." She grew irritated. "We've only danced a few times." Her father, refusing to back down, yelled, "That's exactly what I'm saying. Do you see him showing interest in any other woman? If he didn't like you, I wouldn't have said anything so bluntly. Don't you get it? If it's not him, there are dozens of other gentlemen out there. So, stop these foolish thoughts of yours and find yourself a suitable husband." And that's how Madelyn found herself once again at yet another social event. She was utterly disheartened, as it was becoming increasingly clear that her father was determined for her to marry into well. Selling the estate and the townhouse would likely be better, but she hadn't yet figured out what the two of them would do afterward. Lost in thought, someone approached her. "You're Lady Renfield, aren't you?" Madelyn responded, "Ah, Lord Peril." The man staggered slightly, hiccuping as he continued, "I'm so glad you've attended the party. May I have the honor of a dance with you?" Politely, Madelyn declined. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well at the moment. Perhaps another time." At her refusal, his expression immediately turned sour. "I've heard your family's fortune has been wiped out, but since you're still around, I suppose Lord Renfield doesn't have much to worry about, does he?" He continued, with a sickening tone, 17, eh? Such a ripe age, so full of energy. I'm sure there's a long line of gentlemen eager to save you from your predicament. I suppose I'm not high enough on that list, though." Madelyn trembled with anger, but restrained herself, letting the moment pass. She thanked him for his offer and was about to walk away when suddenly, Ian appeared beside her. "Care to play some music for me?" Ian asked. Madelyn was taken aback. "Lord Nottingham?" Ian continued. "There's something buzzing in my ear, a noise I can't quite ignore. Must be the sound of some foolish old goat who can't tell the difference between decency and vulgarity." Lord Peril, his face turning pale with embarrassment, immediately scurried off to arrange the music. George, witnessing the exchange, remarked, "You're going too far, Ian." That was the host. "Did you really have to interfere like that?" Ian, still calm, replied, "I just deal with things that annoy me." George was taken aback by his friend's uncharacteristic behavior. "Since when do you care so much about Lady Renfield?" he asked, puzzled. Before Ian could respond, someone grabbed Madelyn's arm. "There you are, over there. They've just opened a gown exhibition. Let's go take a look," Isabelle said, leading her away. Ian watched his sister whisk Madelyn off and gave Isabelle a confused, hostile glare as they departed. "Huh, Ian's giving me death glares," Isabelle remarked. "But I'm still wondering, are you sure you're not some kind of supernatural force? Can you see the future, or predict death?" Isabelle asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Madelyn shook her head. "No, I'm not like that." Isabelle looked at her doubtfully. "Do you have any idea how mysterious you are? You not only know the name of the man I love, but also seem to know what I'm planning to do next." Madelyn, direct as ever, asked, "So you're really planning to die?" Isabelle yelled back, "I just wanted to sneak out and have some fun. I was a little tipsy, you know." "You must realize how foolish that was, right?" Madelyn replied, "Of course. You don't think I understand that already?" Isabelle looked at her in surprise. "I always thought you seemed so serious and proper, but maybe I was wrong. Madelyn sighed. I don't need to maintain that image in this life. Isabelle giggled. You remind me of someone I used to know. Who? Madelyn asked, blinking in curiosity. An old friend, Isabelle said, smiling. I think we could be good friends too. Madelyn remained quiet for a moment. An old friend? Why do you say that? Because I feel a connection with you. That's all. No hidden agenda. Oh, and my brother mentioned he'd like to invite you to our estate, Isabelle added casually. Madelyn's breath caught. I thought this life would be different, but it seems like the waves of fate are about to crash over me just like they did in the past. The carriage. The father kept grumbling because his daughter wasn't wearing the violet dress. I've told you already, he said. We're going there to seek financial support, so there's no need for bright clothes. The father sighed. Oh, Madelyn, my daughter, how can you be so foolish at times? This time, it's not Lord Nottingham who invited us, but his eldest son. Madelyn, slightly irritated, replied, why did we even accept an invitation from a family we've never met before, father? Don't expect too much. The Nottinghams are a wealthy and famous family. No one there would be interested in the daughter of a bankrupt baron. I bet Lord Nottingham didn't even write that letter himself. Her father's mood dampened by her words. Whether or not he did, you don't need to say it like that. He sent this letter, fully aware of our circumstances. We must accept this kindness, regardless of what he intends. Madelyn turned cold, thinking, that arrogant man would never propose to me. I'm sure he's just fulfilling his duty. It must be. At the entrance of Nottingham Manor, the butler and maids respectfully welcomed the two guests. Madelyn recognized Sebastian and couldn't believe she was seeing these people under such circumstances. When Sebastian noticed her staring blankly, he asked, is something wrong, my lady? Madelyn, flustered, stammered, no, nothing at all, slightly surprised by how mature and dignified he seemed despite his youth. Suddenly, footsteps approached from ahead. The Earl and Countess of Nottingham, along with their eldest son, Ian Nottingham, came out to greet the guests. We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival, said the Earl. This is my wife, Catherine, and my eldest son, Ian. Baron Renfield bowed respectfully to their hosts, and Madelyn followed suit with a gentle greeting. In her previous life, she had never met the Earl and Countess, as her husband had fallen ill and passed away before the war. The Countess had died later, after witnessing the tragic deaths of her children. In those portraits, the Earl appeared cold, but in reality, he looked cheerful, though somewhat frail. The Nottingham estate, too, had once been like this, lively and full of energy. As she glanced around, Madelyn couldn't help but reflect on the many years she had spent here in her past life. Suddenly, a hand extended toward her. Shall we go inside, my lady? Ian asked. Though hesitant, she took his warm hand. Thank you, Lord Nottingham, she said, pushing aside her earlier worries. Despite her concerns, she and her father spent peaceful days at Nottingham Manor, a place completely different from what she remembered. Everyone here was full of life and vitality, a stark contrast to the estate she had once known. This difference made her see Ian in a new light. If the tragedies hadn't struck this place before she arrived, perhaps their lives would have been different. If I had come here before everything happened, maybe he and I would have. After a pleasant dinner, the Earl invited them to tea and asked if the meal had suited their tastes. But Madelyn hadn't forgotten the true purpose of this meeting. She had to bring up her family's financial situation. Before she could say anything, Lord Nottingham cheerfully announced, I'm so glad to have met you, my lady. Now, let's leave some space for the two of you, shall we? All three adults stood up simultaneously. Confused, Madelyn glanced at her father, who whispered, be good now. The door closed behind them, leaving her standing in bewilderment. She quickly rose, but Ian spoke before she could. You don't need to stand, my lady. I'll be the one to do that. With that, Ian knelt on one knee before her, gazing at her with deep admiration. Lady Madelyn, will you marry me? Madelyn was utterly shocked. Could it be? She had never imagined that the proud Ian would actually propose to her. What are you doing? She stammered. Ian, calmly, you might be surprised by this, so I'll get straight to the point. I've heard that your family is bankrupt. Madelyn exclaimed. What does that have to do with anything? Ian, perplexed, responded. I'm talking about what I can offer you. I've already spoken to my parents, so there's no need to worry. He opened a ring box, presenting it along with his sincere proposal. Lady Madelyn Renfield, it would be an honor for me to take you as my wife. You've seen how old my father is. I want him to witness this before it's too late. Madelyn clenched her fists in anger. Witness what? Our marriage? Yes, Ian replied. Madelyn laughed mockingly. Do you really love me? Ian froze for a moment. What? I asked if you truly love me. Love? Ian stood up silently and responded. Rather than relying on something as fickle as love, I'd say you're fascinating. Or perhaps I like you. You behave like an eccentric philosopher, always discussing unrealistic ideas. And I regret having to say this, but you're more responsible than your father. Didn't you once say you wanted to live without depending on anyone? But the truth is, you need me to handle everything, Ian added. Moreover, I want a wise lady of the house, not a fool like so many others. But the truth is, you need me to bear the burden. Moreover, I want a wise lady of the house, not a fool like so many other girls out there. Don't miss this opportunity. Accept this marriage. Ian's every word pierced Madelyn's heart. As always, he only wants to buy my affection, she thought. Ian tried to explain. I've never. Madelyn interrupted by calling him by name. Ian, I didn't come here today to agree to your proposal. Ian quickly grabbed her hand, his face showing clear signs of distress. You just need time to think, right? At that, Madelyn's anger reached its peak. She yanked her hand away from Ian. I don't want to be sold off to a man just because of my father's debt. I don't want to make the same mistakes again. Ian was baffled. Mistakes? What on earth are you talking about? This marriage benefits you as well. I didn't mean to insult you. Madelyn sighed and rejected him. Lord Nottingham, you and I can never be together. Ian, unwilling to give up, pressed her. At least explain to me why. I feel like a fool here. Madelyn replied, because we would only bring each other misery. Ian held his head in frustration, his eyes showing a mix of confusion and distress. He silently left, like a man who had just been insulted by someone beneath him. Madelyn tightly closed her eyes as the door shut behind her. I shouldn't have come here in the first place, she thought. Even though Ian hadn't done anything wrong, she still wished there would be no connection between them. In her previous life, when Madelyn was 26 years old, she had been in deep despair and anxiety over the disappearance of her dog, Sai. It had poured rain all night, and she had no idea what would happen to him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the front door. Madam? Her eyes lit up when, right in front of her, stood Sai, safe and sound. The butler had brought him back. Knowing how worried she had been, Sai immediately ran to her, enthusiastically nuzzling his owner. Sebastian cleared his throat and explained that it had been the gardener who found him earlier that morning. Although Sai was drenched, he was fortunately unharmed. Madelyn wanted to personally thank the gardener, but the butler's awkward demeanor puzzled her. Sebastian smiled subtly and said, Lord Nottingham is quite exhausted from catching a cold. A cold? Madelyn asked, now sensing something strange. How sudden is that? Is it serious? Sebastian continued. The doctor has prescribed him medicine and advised rest, my lady. So, please refrain from going upstairs. Outside, the rain continued to beat down against the windows, creating a rhythmic tapping sound. But it couldn't drown out the doubts rising in Madelyn's heart. It's just a coincidence, right? She wondered. Why did he fall ill today of all days? She took a deep breath to calm herself and resolutely opened the door to his room. I'm only here to check if he's all right, she reminded herself. Suddenly, Madelyn noticed Ian's overcoat hanging on the rack, completely drenched. Her heart raced in panic. Could it be? Ian had braved the storm to search for Corey? Looking at the man lying on the sickbed, breathless, she could hardly believe her eyes. She approached and gently touched Ian's forehead, gasping, oh no, his fever is so high. At that moment, Ian was drifting in and out of consciousness. His vision blurred, but he vaguely saw a figure leaving the room. Isabelle, he murmured, reaching out and grabbing Madelyn's hand, calling his sister's name. Tears streamed down Ian's face as he cried out in regret. Isabelle, I'm so sorry. I should have let you choose your own path. Please forgive me. It's all my fault. My selfishness caused you so much pain. Madelyn tried to comfort him. Calm down. I'm your wife, not Isabelle. Confused, Ian stammered. Wife? My wife? Madelyn hesitated for a moment. Yes, it's me. Madelyn Nottingham, your wife. Madelyn, my wife? Ian whispered, his fingers intertwining with hers. Madelyn, my wife. The words sounded so sweet and full of affection. Madelyn's cheeks flushed pink. She had never heard him speak her name so tenderly. She glanced at the rose he had secretly plucked and placed in her room. The soft sunlight after the rain gently bathed the crimson petals, their bright color reflecting the small flicker of joy that warmed her heart at this moment. Boom! Suddenly, the scene shifted violently to a battlefield, filled with the deafening sound of bombs and gunfire. The once vivid landscape turned pitch black, draped in death and destruction. Retreat! Fall back, everyone! Move quickly! Lieutenant Nottingham shouted. Our men are severely wounded, sir. The enemy is closing in on us, the soldier warned. My leg. No, no. I don't want to die. Another soldier cried out. Lieutenant, please save us. A voice pleaded, followed by a sharp whistle. Lieutenant, watch out. Bang! A loud explosion snapped Ian awake from his nightmare, gasping for breath as he stared at the chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Every night, he was haunted by the same dream, reliving the horrors of the battlefield. But this time, he realized his left hand was being held tightly. Once he collected himself, Ian noticed her Madelyn sleeping by his bedside. Why is she here in my room? He wondered. Has she been taking care of me? He felt the warmth of her gentle hand holding his inside in relief. No matter what happens, I feel better already. Her hand has pulled me out of my nightmares, banishing the memories of war. We only married out of necessity, Ian thought bitterly. A grieving widow for a broken Earl, shattered by war. I, a man scarred by battle, and she, a young noblewoman, still untouched by the horrors of war. We are from two entirely different worlds. Sebastian, Ian called. Yes, my lord, Sebastian responded. Does she feel less lonely now that I've given her a dog? Sebastian paused. No, my lord. She didn't need a dog to comfort her. She found her way into your world and pulled you back into hers. Ian stared at his hand clasped in hers. But do I even deserve to be with her? I've committed to many sins. I'll probably end up dragging her into the same hell I'm living in. Still lost in thought, Madelyn suddenly stirred. Oh, you're awake, she exclaimed, as she instinctively pulled her hand away. You had such a high fever. Ian responded flatly. I'm fine. The atmosphere between them grew awkward. What about Corey? That troublesome little boy? Ian asked. He's fine now, she answered. Good, I see, Ian murmured. Madelyn, the other day you mentioned wanting to see a movie, didn't you? Madelyn hesitated. Yes, but why are you asking now? Ian replied. Well, from now on, you can leave the estate whenever you wish. I won't stop you anymore. Madelyn, suspicious, asked. Are you trying to make me feel grateful, Ian? Ian averted his gaze. I'm only concerned for your safety. The world isn't safe, but from now on, you can attend any party or event you like. Madelyn was puzzled by his sudden change of heart. First, he went out in the rain to find Corey for me, and now he's telling me I can go watch a movie? Has the world suddenly become safer, Ian? Madelyn asked softly. Ian gripped the sheets tightly. No, I just don't want you getting caught up in my mess, he admitted. Madelyn's heart ached. Your mess? She questioned, her voice full of concern. Don't tell me. Ian quickly cut her off, avoiding further conversation. He commanded her to call the butler. Madelyn hesitated. Ian, you can pick as many flowers as you like. The garden is yours after all. Ian froze. She knows, but maybe it was all right after all. Maybe, just maybe, this was a small glimmer of hope for their relationship. Perhaps this is my last chance, she thought to herself. For the next few days, Madelyn continued to care for Ian until his fever finally subsided. Ian seemed friendlier toward her since that night. If it had been before, he probably wouldn't have even acknowledged her. One day, as she wandered into his study, she noticed an interesting book. It was an original copy of the play Taming the Great. If you like it, you can keep it, Ian offered. Madelyn's cheeks flushed pink. You mean I can keep it? Ian glanced at her as though she were some strange creature. This made Madelyn feel guilty. Oh no, even though he's been kinder to me, I shouldn't have said that, she thought, hurriedly correcting herself. I mean, we're married now. What's yours is mine, right? But I suppose you wouldn't want that. Ian cut her off. It's yours. Everything here is yours. Just like the rose garden is mine. This library belongs to you. Madelin's heart began to flutter as she secretly glanced at her husband. He was giving instructions to the butler about fortifying the estate. It seemed Ian was preparing defenses in case war broke out again. Madelyn wondered, when will he ever let go of his memories of the war? Perhaps that was the only thing that weighed heavily on his mind. She hoped this phase would pass soon. She glanced at the book in her hands. This is an original copy of an old play, so this is what he enjoys. Suddenly, an idea sparked in her mind. A few days later, Nottingham Manor bustled with activity as servants cleaned and decorated the estate. Madelyn had decided to host a movie screening for everyone. The servants were excited about the event, but the butler Sebastian seemed rather concerned for his mistress. "Sebastian," Madelyn said, "this estate needs something new. I know I'm not the best at preparing things, but I want Ian to see that the world is recovering. If he can let go of his memories of the war, do you think everything this estate and Ian himself will change too?" She lowered her gaze and silently hoped that not only he would change, but that she too would. Sebastian, seeing how happy his mistress seemed, was momentarily stunned. He bowed respectfully and apologized for not realizing her thoughtful intentions sooner, and promised to help her prepare everything. Just as their conversation ended, someone called out, "Mr. Sebastian, where should I put this?" The butler sighed as he saw what it was: a tiger's head, stuffed after some hunting trip. "No, we won't be displaying that," he replied with a hint of frustration. "Just put it in my room." Suddenly, Madelyn saw the figure of her husband walking on the upper floor. "I hope this will be a good idea," she thought. Preparations continued. The screen, projector, food, and decorations in the chapel were set. Everyone was excited, including Madelyn. But as for her husband Ian, he seemed completely indifferent to the events unfolding around him. Yet Madelyn knew Ian was simply letting her do what she wanted by pretending not to care. But she had to test this theory. She knocked on the door, and soon heard his voice. "Come in." Madelyn peeked in and asked, "Are you still busy?" Ian replied nonchalantly, "I'm just relaxing in a different way." He glanced up at her, noticing that she seemed unusually quiet. "I'm just a little nervous," Madelyn admitted. "It's the first time we're hosting guests. I hope I haven't made any mistakes. I sent out the invitations, but it was hard to reach some of them. This is my first event as the Countess, and I want everything to be perfect." Ian spoke softly. "It seems like you're doing just fine." Madelyn blushed slightly and widened her eyes. "I was planning to start the movie after tea. Have you ever watched a film before?" Ian responded, "Only once, at a theater in Paris." She touched his shoulder gently, then suggested, "Let's watch it together. It'll be fun." Ian stared at her, momentarily dazed by her gesture. Madelyn, flustered, quickly excused herself. "I'll let you rest." As soon as the door closed behind her, Ian's face flushed bright red, all the way to his ears. Meanwhile, Madelyn covered her burning face with her hands, equally embarrassed. "I said it to him. I really said it." Her heart was racing, pounding like a drum, and her hand where it had touched him was hot and tingling. The next day, their party was held. Thankfully, many guests attended. The differences between the commoners and nobility were now less noticeable, as everyone was dressed in their own unique style. Most guests were curious about the supposed haunted reputation of the estate. It was difficult for Ian to endure the prying stares of the guests. What if he doesn't show up for the film screening? Madelyn wondered nervously. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the upper floor. "I apologize for arriving late." The man came down the stairs, leaning on a cane. "I am Ian Nottingham, the master of this estate. I sincerely thank you all for attending this event." The crowd below murmured, but Ian maintained his calm composure. "I hope you all enjoy yourselves." Madelyn couldn't hide her surprise and happiness. "I'm sorry you were delayed," she said gently. Ian responded, "No need to apologize. We're just about to start the film, right?" "Yes, we are," Madelyn replied, smiling. "Then, let's watch it together," Ian said as he offered his arm for her to hold. Though feeling slightly embarrassed, Madelyn hesitated only for a moment before slipping her hand through his strong arm. As they walked, she suddenly noticed Ian trembling slightly, trying hard to steady himself in front of the crowd. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "You don't have to force yourself," Ian reassured her. "I'm fine. Handling these guests isn't easy for you either. But I know you're worried about me." Madelyn smiled warmly. "Of course I'm worried about you," Ian softly replied. "I'm all right. Besides, I want to watch the movie. Madelin's face lit up with a radiant smile. You want to watch it with me, don't you? Ian didn't respond verbally, but the redness of his ears spoke volumes. As the projector started whirring and the first images of the film flickered on the screen, Ian whispered, "What movie is this?" Madelyn, still smiling, replied, "I'm not sure either. It's the latest work from a famous director. They say it's a comedy, so I thought you'd enjoy watching it with me." Ian cleared his throat, trying to mask his embarrassment. "Thank you for doing all of this." Madelyn's smile deepened with happiness. Within minutes, the entire room was filled with laughter at the film's humor. Even Madelyn found herself laughing heartily at the scenes unfolding on screen. She snuck a glance at Ian, noticing a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He's focused, she thought fondly. But suddenly, Ian shuddered as the movie shifted to a scene where cannons were being prepared for battle. Madelyn, thinking about thanking him for coming, didn't immediately notice the change in Ian's demeanor. However, she soon realized that his whole body was trembling. The booming of the cannons in the film grew louder and louder. Ian clutched his chest in agony, the pain overwhelming him. His walking cane clattered to the floor. The cannons on screen fired again, and with a deafening roar, a flash of fire blazed across the screen. Madelyn, sensing something was wrong, turned just in time to see Ian writhing in pain beside her. "Ian," she screamed, as he seemed to be having a seizure. Panic spread through the room as everyone murmured and gasped, unsure of what was happening. "Someone, please, help us," Madelyn cried out, her voice shaking. "Ian, please someone." The room was suddenly flooded with light as a man rushed forward. "Stay calm, my lady. I'm a doctor," he reassured her. "The Earl's symptoms are a form of epilepsy. We need to stabilize him." The man barked orders to the servants. "Take him back to his room immediately. He could bite his tongue, so place a cloth in his mouth." Madelyn, desperate and tearful, called after him, "Excuse me, you said you're a doctor?" The man nodded. "Yes. I'm a neurologist and I served in the medical corps during the war. My name is Colonel Allington, the eldest son of the Allington family." Through teary eyes, Madelyn managed to thank him, her voice barely steady. "I'm so grateful for what you've done. Thank you." At that moment, Madelyn felt immense relief at Dr. Allington's presence, never imagining how deeply his arrival would later connect to her own fate. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, Madelyn was pulled back to the reality of June 28, 1914, the day war broke out once again. So there are still many things in the past that have not been exposed. She awoke fully, realizing she had sold her London townhouse to pay off debts. From a distance, she noticed soldiers casually walking down the street, each one filled with the fervor of serving their country. But all Madelyn could feel was sadness for them. After the conflicts between Germany, Russia, and now England's involvement, the whole world seemed to be plunging into chaos. Patriotism ran high as throngs of young men eagerly volunteered for the front lines, while those who didn't fight were branded as cowards. The self-sacrificing soldiers were hailed as heroes, much like Madelyn had been in her past life, though they didn't realize what they were truly giving up in the name of patriotism. Madelyn sat, feeling disillusioned and empty, pondering the futility of it all. "Anne and I, there's nothing left between us now. I should forget about this." Suddenly, the door to the room burst open, and the Baron stormed in, shouting like a madman, his voice filled with rage. "Madelyn, you foolish girl!" her father screamed. Madelyn merely frowned, looking at him with a mix of disdain and pity as she observed his ragged and disheveled state. "Drunk again, father?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with a quiet reproach. "So what if I'm drunk?" her father roared, his words slurred. "We're living in poverty, and it's all because of you. That's why I have to drink this filthy, cheap liquor that tastes like sewer water to forget it all. If only you had agreed to that marriage proposal, we wouldn't be living like this." Madelyn sighed deeply, her weariness apparent. "Father, please calm down. I've already sold the townhouse. We need to find a new place to live." Her father's body went rigid. "What did you say?" he stammered, his voice suddenly soft and trembling. "You sold what?" "I've already told you about this, father," she said, resigned. "So please, don't mention that marriage again." Smack. The clean cloth Madelyn had been holding was knocked from her hand by her father, landing in a pool of spilled red wine. His voice rose, louder and louder, echoing throughout the house. "Fine, forget it. I don't need a disobedient daughter like you anyway." From this moment, You are no longer my daughter. I'd rather not have you at all," he screamed. Madelin's heart felt as if it had frozen. "Now I understand," she thought, her eyes dull with acceptance. "The man I called father has never loved me." This was inevitable. Her father continued to point at her, hurling cruel words and insults. Madelyn turned away, her face emotionless. She quietly left, her footsteps heavy with the weight of his words. "After all, Ian will go to war. Our past and our present, they cannot be changed by fate. If this truly is the last time I see him, should I tell him that?" Flash. A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky above the grand Nottingham estate. In one of its rooms, Ian was writhing in pain as the electric shocks pulsed through his body. His entire being trembled and weakened. Dr. Allington stood by, monitoring him closely throughout the process. It was during this time, when Madelyn was 27 years old in her previous life, that she had to witness her husband endure the unbearable agony brought on by the treatments. Though Madelyn's heart ached for him, she was powerless to do anything but trust the doctor. After each session, she would tend to him, soothing him as he lay there, his once vivid green eyes dull and weary from exhaustion. "I woke you up, didn't I? I'm so sorry," she whispered softly, sitting by his side. Ian, forcing a weak smile, replied, "It's all right, I'm fine." Madelyn hesitated before speaking again. "This treatment, it's horrible, isn't it? You mean, the therapy?" Ian managed to continue. "I have to get better. I can't keep living like this. I have to get through this." Madelyn smiled, her heart swelling with hope. Both she and Ian placed their faith in Dr. Allington. He was a respected member of the Royal Medical Association, and there was hope that his treatments would help others too, through the healing of Ian. This was the most advanced therapy of the time, and both Madelyn and Ian hoped that it would prove effective. Ian again drifted into a dreamy sleep. Watching him treat her so gently, Madelyn couldn't help but feel warmth in her heart. "Madam, may I disturb you for a moment? I have a few things to discuss with you about your husband's condition," the doctor said softly. According to Dr. Allington, Ian was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and the latest treatment was somewhat gruesome. Patients were subjected to electric shocks, stronger than the original trauma, to paralyze them. "Do you remember when I explained this to you before?" Madelyn nodded gently. War heroes like him often endured such excruciating pain, even though this therapy was still in its experimental stage. However, the majority of patients no longer experienced any symptoms afterward. Madelyn sighed in relief. "I don't know how to thank you, Doctor." Dr. Allington humbly replied, "It's simply my duty as a physician, but there is something I need you to do during the treatment, please. Do not approach the Earl. He must be left alone to confront this on his own. You see, this therapy is much like amputating a diseased limb. Once it's gone, it cannot be delayed." Madelyn's thoughts returned to when she had urged Ian to attend the movie screening. The horrific sight of him seizing after hearing the fireworks haunted her. She deeply regretted asking him to join her. Dr. Allington emphasized, "The worst thing you can do during this process is indulge the patient. From now on, all communication between you and Ian must go through me. I will, in turn, provide you with updates on his progress every week." The electric device continued to operate, and Ian gritted his teeth, enduring the excruciating pain caused by the machine. Meanwhile, remained indifferent, urging him, "You must endure this, at least for your wife's sake. She's so fragile. Yet she's been taking care of you so attentively. Her suffering, tormented husband. You must become a husband worthy of her. Once you overcome this without anyone's help, the real treatment begins." Ian shuddered as he looked at the sharp needle, his cries echoing through the entire manor. Each time was the same. The treatment was terrifying and ghastly. In his past life, he had put too much trust in Dr. Allington, believing that Ian's screams were signs of improvement. While his episodes had decreased, Ian was gradually becoming more emotionally numb. "Ian," he suddenly stopped at the sound of his wife's voice. "Would you like to let some light into this room? It's a beautiful day," she suggested. Ian replied coldly, "No need. Besides, you're distracting me. Leave the room." "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, hesitant. Ian curtly responded, "No." Medalin faltered, "Oh, good. I just wanted to borrow a book." At that, Ian's face turned sour. "Didn't you hear me? I told you to leave." His cold words pierced her heart. All the tenderness and love from before seemed completely gone. "From now on, stay out of my study," he added, as if all the warmth between them had evaporated into a mere dream. One day, Medalin went to see the doctor, anxiously asking, "Are you sure he's making progress?" Seeing Medalin's dissatisfaction, Con Neo added, I want you to explain more because I don't quite understand this field." Didn't say much, instead handing her a book on the Earl's mental state. He hoped she could learn more about medicine. "I see a great deal of potential in you, madam. You've been taking care of the Earl with such discipline, following all the doctor's instructions. I have high hopes for you. I'd like you to become my assistant nurse." Medalin, surprised, exclaimed, "An assistant nurse?" Doctor was straightforward. "Yes, madam. You see, the chances of the Earl's full recovery are very low if things continue this way." Medalin was shocked. "What do you mean?" "We've placed all our trust in you." Dr. Allington remained calm. "What I mean is that he will not recover in the way you hope, madam." Medalin was stunned. "What? How can that be?" Dr. Allington explained further. "He will no longer have seizures. The illness has been treated." "But don't you feel troubled having to deal with him like this? That's why I'm offering you this chance to leave with me and free yourself. You can become a nurse. What do you think? You have a lot of talent. Don't waste it by staying here, acting like the perfect wife. Consider it revenge against the Earl for trapping you here. You'll be able to learn whatever you want, and I'll help you. So, leave this place and come with me." This conversation was accidentally overheard by a maid. "Are you sure about that?" "I'm sure. I saw it with my own eyes." That Dr. Allington tried to persuade Madam to run away with him. My God, it's scandalous. And how did Madam respond? She didn't say anything. Oh Lord, how could she even consider such a thing? She should be grateful. It's only because of the Earl that she's been living so well. The maids continued whispering about their lady's disgrace. Since when did those two get so close? Madam hasn't left the estate in years, right? If he's made an offer, there must be something going on. Little did they know, someone was standing outside, listening to their gossip. One of the maids lowered her voice and murmured, "It must have been from that time, right? Do you remember when Madam left the estate 2 years ago? Maybe they've known each other since then." "If that's true, then she's a terrible woman," another maid exclaimed. "Oh, how horrible this must be for the Lord." These words struck directly at Ian's pride. His hand trembled as he gripped the cane tightly, suppressing the humiliation and rage. That evening, Ian locked himself in his room and quietly drank strong liquor. "Medalin is planning to leave me? How could she? I've always fulfilled my duties as her husband. In fact, I've done more than I thought I could. I did everything for her warmth. But that smile, it was all fake, wasn't it?" Ian fell into despair. "When did I start to crumble? Think back. Before, every time she saw me, her face would darken. When did she gain the courage to come closer to me? Ah, it was the dog, wasn't it? That day, I went looking for it and caught a cold. I told Sebastian not to tell anyone, but she was there. So why? What was she thinking when she saw me unconscious? Did she think I was someone who could die at any moment? Is that why she called for that doctor? She lied about not having seen that movie, didn't she? She must have invited those people just to stage a performance for me to watch. She's always watching me, seeing how I suffer. Is she waiting for the right moment to escape from this monstrous husband of hers?" A knock on the door interrupted Ian's spiraling thoughts. He glanced down at his trembling hands, feeling disgusted with himself. "It's me. May I come in for a moment?" Medalin noticed the smell of alcohol and stepped closer. "Are you drinking? Is that all right?" "Dr. Allington said you should limit alcohol," she asked cautiously. The moment that name was uttered, Ian flinched, jealousy surging within him. That cursed doctor again. "Even you want to become my doctor now? Why are you becoming more and more like him?" Medalin protested. "No, I'm just worried about you." Ian, hearing this, grew irritated. He exploded in anger, shouting, "I am the master of this estate. Why should I listen to you? If I want to drink, that's my right." Medalin tried to explain, "That's not what I meant. Your treatment is almost over, and I don't want you to fall ill again." But Ian's mind was nearly shattered. In front of him, Medalin's image overlapped with the shadow of another man. "As soon as you're well, doctor, Arlington will leave, won't he?" The other man snickered, "And he'll take me with him." By then, Ian could no longer hear Medalin's words. The shadow of the other man clung to her, taunting him. "I don't want to stay with a monster like you. Every time I touch you, it feels like my skin is rotting. You disgust me. Do you think I enjoy being here because of your precious money? Don't forget, That's all you have. Why would a beautiful woman like me stay with a grotesque creature like you? Ian violently brushed Madelin's hand aside, and then, in cold, heart-piercing words, said, "Go back to your room immediately." Medalin, utterly shocked, asked, "What?" Ian continued his cruel words. "You understand your position, don't you? You were sold to me. If it weren't for me, you'd be starving on the streets by now. So, go back to your room and behave like a proper Countess of Shadow." After delivering those venomous words, Ian left, the door slamming shut with a loud bang, causing Medalin to tremble. That day, it poured rain. Medalin sat in her room, deeply reflecting on Ian's words. How could he say such things? I know he's sick, but how long can I endure this? I'm so exhausted. Suddenly, the door knocked. It was Dr. Allington. He wanted to speak privately with her. Here's the weekly health report on the Lord. His response to the electroshock therapy hasn't raised any issues, so he'll only need a few more treatments, Dr. Allington explained. Medalin thanked the doctor, but hesitated. You could have met me in the drawing room. Why did you come to my private chambers? Dr. Allington adjusted his glasses and responded calmly. I apologize for the intrusion, but I don't have much time. I'll be leaving today, as the Lord has requested. Have you thought about my offer? Medalin hesitated. Dr. Allington pressed further. I've told you many times, madam. You have great potential, and you can do whatever you wish. He grasped her shoulders, trying to persuade her. The world outside this manor is changing every day. You don't need to force yourself to be a wife anymore. Leave behind those old-fashioned thoughts and come with me. Medalin quickly pushed him away. This isn't good for my husband. Besides, his condition could worsen. Dr. Allington cruelly threw cold water on her concerns. You still think you can become his beloved wife? Huh. Look at reality. Medalin, the Earl has already started drinking again. He completely ignores the doctor's advice not to drink. Forgive me for being blunt, but he is neither a proper patient nor much of a man anymore. Stop it. Medalin shouted, refusing to accept the truth. Please, stop criticizing us. Dr. Allington sighed. Oh, poor Medalin. Do you really think you'll have another chance to escape? I will be the last one to offer you a way out of here. Did you see the way the Earl sent me away? You don't even have the chance to leave anymore. Are you truly ignoring what I'm telling you? By now, Medalin was wavering. Be honest with yourself, Medalin. Are you really prepared to spend the rest of your life trapped in this manner? You won't be so cruel to yourself, will you? The only thing in Nottingham offers you in the name of love is chains, Dr. Allington sneered. At that moment, Medalin broke down, sobbing. I know everything. I want to go with you. Unbeknownst to them, Ian had overheard every word. His voice suddenly growled, making both of them jump. The terrifying monster that was Ian Nottingham finally revealed itself. Medalin felt as though all the blood drained from her body. She frantically pushed Dr. Allington's hand off her and stood still as Ian's shadow stretched long across the wall. So, Ian sneered, is my hideous appearance bothering you? Medalin screamed in pain as Ian suddenly grabbed her wrist tightly. So you've been cheating on me, haven't you? That Baron has made you fall for him, hasn't he? What promises did he make to you? Ian shouted. Medalin remembered the words Dr. Allington had spoken to her. Oh, poor Medalin. The only thing Ian Nottingham offers you in the name of love is chains. She gritted her teeth, cursing him silently. You have no idea how much I've suffered. Medalin screamed. Look at what you're doing. I can't stay here a moment longer. Don't even think about stopping me. With a loud crash, Medalin fell down the stairs. The tragedy of her past life had come to a close, and her fate in this life once again depended on him. Ian, are you there? Ian was surprised to hear his sister's loud knocking at the door. Ian, Isabelle hurriedly called out. She's here. He looked stunned as she added, It's Madelyn Renfield, the one who rejected your proposal. A few hours earlier at the Nottingham estate, the 3 children of Earl Nottingham were deeply worried as they saw their mother emerge from the room with a despondent look on her face. Mother, how is father? One of them asked. The grief-stricken mother shook her head. He likely won't make it through the night, she replied. Ian spoke up. I'll try to delay my enlistment, mother. Even Eric was in pain, seeing his father's health deteriorate. If father passes away, and both of us go off to war, it'll be just you and Isabelle left, he said. Isabelle exclaimed, Can't you stay? Eric is exempt from military service after all. Eric replied, It's my duty as a nobleman. Isabelle shouted, That's nonsense. If you go to the front lines, you'll die like a dog. Their mother tried to calm her daughter down, but Eric sighed. As much as I wanted to be at the front, because of you, I've been reassigned to the reserves. It's humiliating. Isabelle snapped back. You should be thankful I saved your life. And you too, Ian. You may be a fool, but take care of yourself, all right? Ian, knowing his sister's fiery temper, just nodded in agreement. Enough. Take care of mother and yourself. Isabelle grumbled again, but this time, Eric stopped her. Tired of arguing with his sister, Eric excused himself and returned to his room. As Ian walked down the hallway, he thought to himself, it seems father won't survive the night. Once the funeral is over, I'll have to go to war. If I can't avoid my military duty, I'll just have to do whatever it takes to survive. Isabelle will manage the estate while Eric and I are away. And that girl. He thought of Medalin, furrowing his brow and pressing his temples as memories of her resurfaced. Ian mused. At first, I thought she was just an ordinary noblewoman. But each time we talked, I wanted to be with her more. Her smile stirred something in me, and it only pushed me further to settle her family's debts. I wanted to see her radiant smile once more. But now, none of that matters anymore. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door, followed by Isabelle's voice calling out, Ian, are you in there? Outside, the rain poured down heavily. Madelyn stood there waiting for him, her whole body trembling from the cold. Lady Renfield, you truly don't know how to listen, do you? You said you were leaving. So why are you here now? Ian sarcastically remarked, paying no attention to decorum. Madelyn hesitated. I have something important to tell you. Ian mockingly replied, so important that you're willing to make a fool of yourself? Madelyn cried out, I know I look like a madwoman. I know I shouldn't be involved with you anymore. But Ian coldly interrupted, you're saying that again. Last time, when you rejected my proposal, you said the same thing. Madelyn hesitated. I heard you're enlisting. Ian, with indifference, responded. What strong gentleman wouldn't? She exclaimed. You really have to go? Ian suddenly moved in close to her, his face just inches from hers. Why? What does my choice have to do with you? Madelyn tried to stop him. You'll lose everything in that war. Her face showed clear signs of sorrow. That's all I wanted to say to you. Ian's hand trembled slightly at her touch. Madelyn pleaded, please, don't go. I know what you think of me. I've never done anything like this before, but please, don't go to that war. Ian, surprised, said, I thought you hated me. Madelyn replied, maybe, but I don't despise you. Ian scoffed. You're not sure? That's probably just pity. Madelyn insisted, even if it is, I truly don't want you to go. Ian coldly rejected her. Don't think that just because I proposed to you, you can stop me. This is a war. Facing danger is normal. I'm ready to sacrifice for this country. Do you think I'll change my mind? I'm not a fool. Ian suddenly grabbed her hand tightly and coldly said, you don't need to worry about me. That's enough. It's late. You should stay here tonight. Ian grabbed a lantern and headed back to the manor. Madelyn cried out, why did you propose to me? You said it wasn't because you loved me, right? I don't have any feelings for you either. So, neither of us has anything to lose. I'll do whatever it takes to become the person you want me to be. In return, promise me you won't go to that war. If we get married, I'll agree. I'll marry you, sis. Ian felt an overwhelming sense of frustration. He perceived her disdain, believing that she yearned for a man who would adore her unconditionally, hence her continual rejection and departure. Such behavior would at least spare him some semblance of dignity. He no longer wished to become a victim of her fleeting whims. Regardless of what she might say now, he remained steadfast in his decision to enlist. Madelyn stood beneath the cold, rainy sky, her heart heavy with sorrow as she recalled the heartbreaking images of him. Why had she come here? Why did she think this man would heed her call? Yet, she couldn't allow things to proceed as they were. She couldn't let him leave in such a manner. Suddenly, a strange noise prompted Madelyn to turn her head. Rushing towards her, she nearly exhausted herself trying to hold him back. Ian frowned slightly at her perplexing actions, but within a second, his jade-green eyes widened in surprise as he witnessed Madelyn attempting to hold back her tears, looking utterly pitiful. Please don't go, she pleaded softly. His heart softened, yet her enigmatic behavior left him bewildered. Even though she seemed to care deeply for him, he couldn't comprehend why she was preventing him to such an extent. Previously, she had accused him of arrogance, deeming a stubborn wife incompatible with him. "I hope you find someone better than me," he thought to himself. Madelyn Renfield was filled with profound disappointment. In the end, she couldn't alter the cruel fate that awaited him. Would there be another chance? One day, while searching for employment in the newspaper, she stumbled upon the list of casualties from a recent battle. Furrowing her brows as she read, she exhaled a long, relieved breath, only to suddenly realize something was amiss. Surely, Ian wouldn't perish. After all, he had returned from his past life. Perhaps she shouldn't leave his treatment solely to Dr. Allington. It might be the most advanced therapy available, but his condition worsened. If Ian were to return injured again, she needed to find another way. As she pondered, a knock sounded at the door. A letter had arrived for her. Upon opening it, she was astonished to find it was a handwritten note from Isabelle. It turned out that Isabelle wished to transform Nottingham Manor into a military hospital, a dream Medalin had harbored amidst these tumultuous times. Despite Mrs. Nottingham's objections, Isabelle was resolute in her intentions and was currently recruiting volunteers eager to become nurses to care for the wounded. Everyone would have a place to stay, meals to eat even if the food was meager and wages to earn. Without hesitation, Medalin accepted the offer. "Hello, Madelyn. I'm so glad you've arrived." Isabelle greeted her with a gentle smile as she ushered her inside. "You're the first to join us, Medalyn." Medalyn was taken aback. "Oh, really?" she responded. Slightly surprised, Isabelle chuckled warmly. "You see, I'm not exactly a high society figure, and I had to consider the situation between you and my brother. I didn't want you to bring up those matters and make things awkward, but it's all right." She looked genuinely excited. "This will be your room, Madelyn. It was once the servants' quarters, so the rooms are a bit cramped. I've converted the larger guest rooms into triage stations. Additionally, I've let the servants rest to cut costs, so you'll need to tidy up your room yourself." "No problem at all, Isabelle. I actually love this room. It feels so bright and cheerful," Medalin replied. Isabelle beamed inwardly. "That's wonderful. My room is next door." Medalin smiled brightly. "Great. Take a look around my new room. This will be your residence for the time being. It's fortunate to have both work and accommodation." Meanwhile, Chef Cook Carrot was swiftly chopping carrots. Upon witnessing Isabelle's frantic chopping, he was horrified. "Miss, that's dangerous. Let me handle it." But Isabelle paid him no mind, continuing to smash the pile of carrots. "We're in a time of war. I can't sit idly by while you do everything. Let him handle it," she insisted. The chef became even more alarmed. "I understand, but miss, please be careful." The butler looked as though he wanted to implore Medalin for help, but she remained silent, uncertain of how to advise the frazzled lady. After a moment, Medalin spoke up. "Miss Isabelle?" Upon hearing her name, Isabelle turned her head, her eyes gleaming with excitement as if she had discovered a dazzling treasure, making Medalin feel both amused and helpless. In the end, she had no choice but to lend a hand. The two of them could only cry out in despair at the sight. "Yes, Medalin? The nurse instructor will be arriving shortly. We're about to become nurses," Isabelle announced. A short while later, the instructor Isabelle had mentioned arrived. "I am Mrs. Osborne. I will oversee your training to become nurses," she introduced herself. "First, you must understand that becoming a nurse cannot be achieved in such a short time. It's best to give up the idea of becoming Florence Nightingale overnight. Additionally, there are numerous challenges that noble ladies like yourselves will face, such as dealing with blood, organs, and the anguished cries of young warriors in pain. These are just a few of the difficulties. However, the doors will always remain open for those who have the courage to step forward. By overcoming these initial hardships and being diligent learners, this work will be deeply rewarding. Now, let's begin," she continued. Thus, the girls gradually became accustomed to administering injections and bandagging patients, dedicating 10 hours each day to learning all aspects of nursing. They spent their remaining time learning to cook and prepare daily meals. Although their bodies were weary, Madelin's heart was full and happier than in her previous life, which had been marked by dark and lonely years. Slowly, those shadows faded, replaced by joy and hearty laughter each day, surrounded by friends and colleagues. 2 months had passed. "Don't work yourself too hard, Medalin," Isabelle advised. Medalin was engrossed in her duties. I need to stay busy to keep my mind from wandering, Isabelle. Indeed, Isabelle sighed. With this hectic schedule, I sometimes forget about the overwhelming responsibility of managing an entire military hospital or worrying about my two brothers. Medalin teased. Has anyone told you that you resemble Mr. Nottingham? Isabelle frowned slightly. Which Mr. Nottingham are you referring to, Miss Medalin? Ian, of course. The two comforted each other, knowing that once a decision was made, they would see it through to the end. You are a strong-willed woman, and I must thank you for changing my life, Medalin added. So, don't be afraid. Isabelle blushed, her cheeks turning red as she nervously whispered her gratitude. Are you worried about him? Medalin immediately froze. And no, of course not, Isabelle. Why then did you come here that day, despite the heavy rain, to prevent him from enlisting? Isabelle persisted, not letting it go. She always glanced toward his room whenever she stood there. Medalin wanted to defend herself, but found no words. Please, don't be troubled anymore. Why didn't you write him a letter? It only takes 3 days to reach him. She remained silent, stiffly thanking Isabelle. But it's not that I'm worried about him, she insisted. Isabelle looked incredulous. Are you sure about that, Medalin? Before long, they had to leave and continue their duties. At the front lines, a soldier was hastily running towards a lieutenant's tent. Lieutenant Nottingham, I have a letter for you. Greetings, I am Madelyn Renfield. Autumn is nearing its end. I hope this letter does not cause you any inconvenience. Perhaps you'll find rest more meaningful than reading this letter. I believe there will come a day when we can discuss what has transpired between us. But for now, I send this letter in case there is no other opportunity. Oh dear, are you reading it too, Ian? He glanced over to see him two close friends standing nearby. The weather has turned to winter. Remember to dress warmly and keep the fire away from the barrels. I did read an article about soldiers who, due to negligence, caused unfortunate accidents, Medalin added. George casually puffed on his cigar, mocking the scrap of paper before it even became a formal document. Surprised? Are you? He teased. Ian snatched the cigar from his friend's hand, his expression stern. How many times have I told you to be careful with fire, George? He admonished. At that moment, George remembered. Oh right, we're near the fuel depot. We need to be extra cautious. George, Lieutenant Nottingham's woman is always reminding us about that, isn't she? Ian frowned slightly. But you keep reading that letter every day, even though I've told you she's not my girl anymore. With my experience as a married man, I can assure you it's true. Ian could only sigh, his cheeks flushing red from his friend's remarks. Those two names, she's just a woman who keeps bothering me. Enough, George. He whistled and sighed enviously. I wish someone would write to me like that, his friend teased. That's karma from those persistent types. Don't be too greedy. Laughter echoed throughout the camp. Somehow, Ian couldn't help but worry about him. I know I have no right to say that, but I still hope you return safely. If you want to joke about this letter, that's fine. I hope you can overlook my somewhat foolish reminders and stay safe. I'm not advising you out of pity. Best regards, Medalin. Another day, Medalin received a letter from the front lines addressed to Miss Madelyn Renfield. A letter sent in a green envelope wouldn't be censored. Using her superior officer to send such a letter was quite laughable, wasn't it? She pondered the strange things the young woman had said on that rainy night, begging her not to enlist because she would lose everything, while everyone else was volunteering to fight. Perhaps that's why she decided to be honest in this letter. She told her family and friends that everything was fine. Medalin, Isabelle called out urgently. We have our first patient. Hurry up. Medalin snapped out of her daydream in the treatment room. The agonizing screams of a soldier startled everyone. The truth was, things were worse than they seemed. They realized that in this place, they were nothing more than flesh and bones. But don't worry, Medalin. Once the real battle begins, even worse things will happen. We'll probably have to earn more victories before we can go home. That way, she won't mock us. Just kidding. After struggling with the first patient, Medalin's temples throbbed with pain. The life of a wartime nurse was no easy feat. She reread the letter he had written, but her desire to learn more about her was genuine. Miss Madelyn Renfield, she began her letter. Sincerely, Ian Nottingham. I also need to reply to your letter, don't I? Medalin began to write. I also want to learn more about you, sir. You're persistent. Let me introduce myself first. My hair is blonde. Upon reading this, Ian couldn't help but burst into laughter. I don't like feeling lonely, but having a book would certainly help, he wrote in his reply. I've also written back. If you enjoy reading so much, feel free to use my letterbox. I hope there will be books and authors you love. You also want to know about me, right? My name is Ian Nottingham, currently a soldier. I have something I want to ask you. You've volunteered to help Isabelle with the challenging mission she's undertaken. I don't mean to discourage you, but isn't that quite difficult? I just hope you don't overwork yourself. Isabelle and Mrs. Nottingham are even busier than I am. Thank you for taking care of me, sir. But hearing you say that, Isabelle must have your permission, right? To be honest, who else has the authority to give her permission? Your books are wonderful. When you return, I'll pay you back. Ian smiled and murmured about repaying his debts to her, causing his cheeks to flush red as a blinding light flashed, signaling imminent danger. Instinctively, Ian turned around, his once emerald green eyes now ablaze with flames, followed by a series of loud explosions. Miss Madelyn Renfield, we need to clarify something with her from the very beginning, Ian said. Isabelle never even sought my consent. It's simply that I didn't want to hinder the young lady, because her intentions are entirely noble. I want to ensure that when I return, I will receive the fee for borrowing the books, but I fear that might not be possible. For her, upon my return, she will see that this war shows no signs of ending. Moreover, I wish to ask her a question that I might never have the chance to. Does she enjoy opera at Nottingham Manor? Medalin read the letter from Ian once more. Perhaps we should attend the opera together instead of watching that film, she mused. She settled at her desk and began to pen a reply. I don't know if you enjoy opera, sir, but I do appreciate it very much, though I seldom have the opportunity to indulge. Time has slipped away. 2 years had passed since that fateful night. As Medalin was engrossed in her writing, a knock echoed at the door. Haven't you gone to bed yet? She wondered. It was Isabelle. Her once raven black hair had grown significantly longer. As she took a seat, her fiery temperament resurfaced. What are these things? And whiskey again? Medalin sighed. 2 years have flown by like a flash. Time has passed swiftly. You've been working tirelessly day and night. Isabelle, do we have more patients now? Madelyn inquired. Yes, everything is progressing well, and our hospital is expanding further. My relatives are investing substantial funds here, likely hoping to gain some prestige, Isabelle responded. Madelyn, I want to ask you something straightforward. Have you found someone to love? Isabelle asked. Madelyn felt her heart shatter. Love? What? Isabelle, observing her various expressions, found it amusing. I mean, aside from my brother, of course, she teased, her cheeks turning crimson. No, I don't, Isabelle exclaimed. Oh, so my brother is your only one? Medalin dismissed the notion. I didn't mean that. Isabelle pondered for a moment. Do you know that Ian only sent me a postcard? He merely wrote a few sentences like everything is still fine. Remember to take good care of your mother. He's a very calculating person. He wouldn't do anything that doesn't benefit himself. Yet now, he's exchanging letters with a girl who has already rejected his marriage proposal. I can't believe it stops there, Medalin replied, bewildered. He just needs some comfort in difficult times. Isabelle sipped her tea and responded, just think of it that way. What about you? Every time his letter arrives late, you sigh and can't concentrate on your work. Medalin stammered, it's just friendship. And I also have male friends. Isabelle nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure you understand. Isabelle contemplated. Do you want to hear a secret from me? Once the war ends, I will live with the person I love. Ian smiled and murmured about repaying his debts to her, causing his cheeks to flush red. Madelin's cheeks flushed rosy as she thought of such a romantic scene. And then I will pursue a career based on all that I've learned here. What about you, Madelyn? Are you still going to write letters to him when the war ends? At the battlefield, Ian was advising a lieutenant about the necessary precautions around the camp. Suddenly, a shout from someone drew his attention. Please wake up, Antonio. The military ambulance is coming right away. His shoes were torn, with his toes sticking out, while a swarm of mice scurried, awaiting an opportunity to gnaw. Caught off guard by this sight, Ian instinctively shielded himself. The soldiers' faces appeared dazed and despondent. Some were gravely injured, unable to tend to their wounds properly, while panic ensued and dead bodies were overrun by FLIs. Ian, Lieutenant, sir, he commanded. Yes, sir. We need to clear all the personal belongings of these fallen soldiers and carry their bodies out of the trench, the lieutenant responded. If we leave them here, the plague will spread to the healthy soldiers, Ian ordered firmly. He stamped his heavy footsteps and departed. Miss Renfield, we haven't written to her in a long time. Now, everything seems to be in order, Isabelle exclaimed. The wooden shutters had been banged in anger by a soldier, making it impossible for Ian to restrain himself as he witnessed the soldiers around him suffering so. I apologize, he said. Now, I can't pray for her to live peacefully and happily where she is. On a sunny day, Medalin would take patients outside to breathe fresh air. During these walks, I think if I could smoke a cigarette, the pain would be lessened. Medalin sighed, her eyes wide open as she opened a pack of cigarettes. Don't tell anyone, okay? The soldier was overjoyed. Hooray! Why are you being so kind to me? It must be because I'm handsome, right? Medalin forced a smile. Maybe it's because you're about to be discharged, she replied. He's laughing heartily. Ha, ha, if my legs weren't like this, I would have dated you already. I know you have a man at war, don't you? I saw you brighten up when Altur arrived for you. Madelyn embraced. He's not my man. But you like him, don't you? No, not exactly. Medalyn tried to explain gently. Rather, I empathize with him. We've known each other for quite a while. So, when that soldier hears it, he might feel sad. Probably not, she continued, her cheeks flushing slightly. He hasn't responded to me in a long time. The soldier became pensive. I understand. War zones are places where many never return. There are young men with dreams and aspirations, the devoted son and dutiful lover. All those hopes are stolen by the battlefield. It is something precious. Maybe he can't reply to your letters, but those letters are his beacon of faith to survive. Life is so cruel. I can't bear it anymore. So please, don't give me false hopes. Suddenly, Isabelle appeared. Madelyn, we have a new patient now, she said. Dear sir, it's been a very long time since I've received a letter from you. But no worries, I don't blame you. Things must be chaotic over there. I can't even begin to imagine the hardships you've been through. Are you keeping yourself clean? I hope my reminder as a nurse will help you stay mindful. In the hospital room, Madelyn suddenly shuddered as she saw someone before her, wrapped in bandages from severe burns all over his body. He trembled uncontrollably, which only strengthened her resolve. I just hope you are safe. I don't know why, but right now, even though we are in two different places, while you are sinking into the depths of hell, I feel closer to you than ever before. I truly want us to become good friends when we meet again. So please, come back safely. Return home. Return to Nottingham Manor. After finishing changing the pilot's bandages, Madelyn heard Isabelle calling her. Madelyn, he sent you a letter. She hurriedly pushed her out of the room, saying, you should rest. As soon as Madelyn stepped outside, she quickly opened the letter. Her cheeks had turned red without her realizing, and she began to read it attentively. However, just a few seconds later, her face suddenly darkened, and tears started streaming down onto the letter. Summer of 1916. He sent me a letter from the Somme River, France. Thinking back now, it's astonishing that this letter even reached me, as if by some miracle. Everyone, move to the third trench. After giving the order, Ian quickly refocused on his aim. Suddenly, a grenade flew toward them. A hand grabbed his shirt and pulled him back. Boom! The grenade exploded, and its shockwave sent everyone flying backward. Ian collapsed to the ground in pain. Lieutenant, are you okay, Lieutenant? The shockwave had affected his ears, making him unable to hear for a brief moment. When he regained his senses, Ian's eyes widened in shock at the sight of the one who had pulled him back. His best friend was lying in a pool of blood, muttering his final words. Why did you save me? The ringing in his ears continued to echo as his friend lay motionless before him. To Lady Renfield, I ask that you refrain from sending me any more letters. I don't think I will survive to return, so you should not keep in touch with someone whose life or death is uncertain. Furthermore, every time I feel that my life is meaningless, your letters give me hope, but life is cruel, and I can no longer endure it. So please, do not give me any more false hope. Madelyn trembled, her inner thoughts echoing, I'm so stubborn, Ian. In truth, my feelings for you are no longer just sympathy. Ian has faced life and death many times. One day at the clinic, Isabelle brought some surprising news. Have you heard, Madelyn? We're getting a new doctor. Apparently, he's a military officer, and I heard he's a neurologist. Madelyn, still in a daze from her fever, could only respond with a faint murmur. Her entire body was burning up. Meanwhile, The patient in the next bed suddenly started to mumble incoherently. No, sir? Are you awake? You've been in a coma for days, the patient exclaimed. A nurse quickly responded. Let me call the doctor. Madelyn noticed the patient had an American accent. She tried to calm the soldier by holding his bandaged hand tightly. It's all right, just relax. Your name is Lowell, right? The man looked back at her with a blank expression. My name is John. What about your age? Madelyn asked. His voice suddenly panicked. I don't know. I can't remember anything. It's okay. Madelyn continued to soothe him. The doctor will be here soon. So just before she could finish, her whole body swayed, and she nearly collapsed. Luckily, a hand reached out and caught her just in time. You have a fever, Madelyn, a calm voice said. Thank you. She mumbled weakly, but then her face turned pale when she heard a rustling sound. She looked up, panting in fear, only to see the man gently inspecting her with a professional look. I'm just giving you a quick checkup. No need to be so scared, he said with a polite smile. It was Cornell, the new doctor. He introduced himself courteously. I'm Dr. Cornell Allington, a neurologist. Isabelle added, Madelyn, from today, Dr. Allington will be working with us. Madelyn managed a weak greeting, but Cornell insisted she should rest. Taking good care of yourself is also part of a nurse's duty, he said gently. She looked back at him with a defiant glare, even though she was clearly exhausted. Cornell glanced at the patient lying in the bed and explained, this patient suffered third-degree burns from an airplane accident. The wounds have been severely infected, so we need to change the bandages frequently. He only remembers his name is John but nothing else. Are you the nurse in charge of this patient? Cornell asked. Yes, Madelyn replied curtly. I'll review the rest of his information in the medical records. You should get some rest. Passing out in a place filled with medical equipment would just create more work for us. Wouldn't you agree? Cornell said, a hint of humor in his voice. Madelyn's mind was in turmoil. How could this be? This couldn't be happening. What more could fate have in store for her? The previous life was a tragedy. And what is this life supposed to be? Could it be a crueler farce than the tragedy itself? After resting and recovering from her fever, Madelyn finally woke up. In this life, she once again encountered Dr. Allington. Deep in thought, she got out of bed and wrote him a letter. Dear Lord Nottingham, you asked me not to write to you again, but please forgive me for sending this letter. You see, I can't turn my back on you, even if it's just out of sympathy, friendship, or whatever it may be. Perhaps you want to abandon yourself, but I won't abandon you, Lieutenant. You have this letter, even if it's just my feeble and meaningless protest. Ian looked at the stack of letters and sighed inwardly. So many letters. She must be writing to me every day, he muttered, smiling softly. How foolish. Every time I read her letters, I feel so weak, living in fear and cowardice instead of dying heroically, worthy of the title of a true lieutenant. If God allows me to return safely, I'll tell her she's truly foolish, and I'll propose to her once more. Boom. Lieutenant Nottingham. Lieutenant Cornell's unit is under attack. Boom. They're being ambushed. Ian quickly gave the order. I'll go rescue Lieutenant Cornell. Hold the defensive line until I return. Let me go with you, sir, shouted a soldier as he volunteered. Ian urgently left amidst the chaos. Damn it, George. He cursed under his breath as bullets and shells rained down. George, where are you? A faint moan came from a distance. H here, help me. George was gasping for breath, lying amidst a pile of corpses. Are you all right, George? Ian asked anxiously. My leg. George trembled as he replied. Soldier, come over here and help him. I'll cover you, Ian ordered. Yes, sir. The soldier responded promptly. Amidst the relentless downpour of bullets, the three men skillfully maneuvered away from the danger. If you can, carry him on your back. We'll get him out of here. Suddenly, the soldier realized the imminent danger. Lieutenant Nottingham, watch out. Boom. With a thunderous explosion, someone's helmet and gun were splattered with blood and embers. One side of Ian's face was destroyed, and his ears were now ringing endlessly. Madelyn, I'm sorry. And just like that, Ian lost consciousness in the midst of the chaos. At the Grand Army Medical Camp at the Nottingham estate, Madelyn was still caring for the patient. Nurse, are you all right? Asked her softly. Does Mr. Hughes need more painkillers? John shook his head. No, I'm fine. I had a dream. I saw myself on a train with my mother, and my father gave me some candy. It was just a dream, but it was so sweet. I was happy then, but when I woke up, I couldn't remember their faces anymore. It was just a dream." "No, that couldn't have been just a dream," Madelyn replied. Earl fell silent, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. How strange it was that, in her previous life, she would never have met or spoken to people like this. Was it true? Did she also have such dreams? Perhaps that was why she was being honest with herself and sharing memories from her past life. Madelyn cheerfully recounted, "It was a long time ago. I dreamt that I got married and lived in a large mansion, alone. I planted a garden full of roses and kept company with a dog. And I hated a man. I thought he hated me too. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe I always wanted a fresh start with him. But by the time I realized it, I'd already messed everything up. Anyway, it's just a dream." Nobody would believe it. By the time she finished telling her story, John had already fallen asleep. Madelyn smiled softly, a hint of sadness in her expression. But then, a voice broke the silence. "I believe you. I believe in your story," the voice said. Madelyn felt a sense of connection and comfort. After leaving the room, she was startled to see a figure behind her. It was Isabelle, with a complicated expression on her face and a letter in her hand. Isabelle covered her face, unable to speak. "Madelyn, my brother Ian. Her voice trembled as she held out the letter, a telegram. It read, "Lieutenant Nottingham has been severely wounded in battle." One day, back in the hospital room, the soldier managed to recall a few more things. "I remember the face of a man. He had brown hair, blue eyes, and a smile like an angel. I don't know who he is, but I was furious with him, and he cried." John clutched the blanket tightly and cried out, "There are so many things I regret. It feels like they're suffocating me." Madelyn tried to reassure him. "You don't have to force yourself to remember." John continued, "I became a pilot and joined the military all because of him. I should have asked for his forgiveness and expressed my love before coming here. Please don't record my story anymore. My family has probably forgotten about me," he added sorrowfully. "No, that's not true. It's just that we haven't found them yet. We've placed your name in the American newspaper and sent letters to families whose members share your name. We'll have news soon," Madelyn countered, trying to comfort him. John looked down sadly. "You know, the more I remember, the more I realize what a terrible person I am." Madelyn gently probed further. "So, what about the man in my dream? Does he sound like a good person to you? He's probably even worse, isn't he? But you see, every day I pray for him to return to me. And every time I fear he won't come back, I realize that I've fallen in love with him. Your family is likely the same, so don't worry and just focus on getting better." Tears rolled down the soldier's face, soaking through the bandages. Just then, a nurse called out to her, "Madelyn, come to the main hall. Lieutenant Nottingham has returned." Upon hearing this, Madelyn immediately stood up, quickly making her way down the hallway while whispering his name over and over. Ian has returned." But just as she was about to call out his name, she froze in her tracks. The man in the uniform wasn't the one she had been longing for. "Your family is so proud of you. Look at how much you've grown, Eric," his mother said, beaming. Eric, the young man, looked back at his mother and sister with his bright blue eyes, filled with joy at being reunited with his family. Watching them together, Madelyn felt a mix of emotions, both happiness and sorrow. Right, the Nottinghams didn't just have Ian as their only son. Noticing someone standing nearby, Eric turned around. Madelyn lifted her dress slightly and curtsied like a proper lady. Eric felt amused and nodded politely in return. "Have you seen Lieutenant Nottingham today?" a nurse asked. "Of course. He's like a breath of fresh air around here. And he's so handsome that the entire estate lights up when he's home." "Seeing someone return safely like that fills me with hope," he said cheerfully. "Having soldiers return means the war is nearing its end, right?" Madelyn thought to herself, feeling a spark of hope amidst all the uncertainties. "Yes, I noticed that Miss Isabelle seems much more lively lately," someone commented. But Madelyn's attention was abruptly interrupted as her hand was firmly grasped by someone else. "Please remember that the first rule is not to touch the medical equipment," the voice said sternly. Madelyn flinched and apologized. Cornell sighed. "You're probably overworking yourself. You should take a break, Miss Renfield." Madelyn felt a slight annoyance but kept her composure. "I'm fine, really. There's no need for me to rest." Cornell continued. You've been acting strange these past few days, making mistakes in many things. Frankly, you're becoming a hindrance to others. I'm sorry, I'll try harder, Madelyn replied, forcing herself to stay calm. Cornell narrowed his eyes at her, his gaze sharp. He suddenly grabbed her wrist again and asked in a firm tone, "Do you need me to escort you back to your room?" Madelyn, startled, exclaimed, "I said I'm fine." Just then, a familiar voice broke the tension. "Hello, doctor." Eric stood there, smiling warmly. "You're Dr. Allington, aren't you? I've heard a lot about you," he said cheerfully. Cornell greeted him politely and introduced himself. As they shook hands, Eric continued, "If you have time, could you examine me too? Miss Renfield said that you're a very skilled doctor. She's quite close to our family, so please take good care of her." As he spoke, Eric tightened his grip on Cornell's hand as if issuing a warning. "She's also particularly close to my brother, the head of our family." Cornell calmly withdrew his hand and replied nonchalantly, "I think you've misunderstood. I only want Miss Renfield to avoid overworking herself. Besides, regardless of how close she is to your family, she's still my colleague. Supervising the nurses is part of my responsibility." Eric maintained his smile but retorted, "I suppose you've forgotten that it's the Nottingham family who established this clinic, haven't you?" Sensing that the atmosphere was getting tense, Madelyn quickly intervened. "It's okay, Eric. I've made mistakes too. But doctor, as a nurse and a woman, I kindly ask you not to touch me so casually. I promise I won't hinder anyone's work." Cornell fell silent, unable to come up with a response. Suddenly, Isabelle rushed over, her voice filled with excitement. "Madelyn, Eric, the military just sent a telegram. Ian has made it through the critical phase. He'll be returning to the estate soon." That night, Madelyn couldn't sleep at all. After hearing the news that Ian would be returning, she decided to have a cup of tea to calm herself. As she reached for the teapot, she overheard Eric speaking. "Sister Isabelle, with Ian coming back soon." Peeking through the doorway, Madelyn saw the siblings deep in conversation. It seemed Eric wanted to shut down the clinic because Yan, being a war veteran, might struggle to recover with so many other wounded soldiers around him. Isabelle was about to argue, but Madelyn couldn't help but step in. "Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt your conversation, but I couldn't sleep," Madelyn said softly. Isabelle smiled brightly and waved her in. "We couldn't sleep either, Madelyn. Come in and join us. Look at him." She pointed at her brother, teasing him. "Eric wants me to close the clinic. What do you think?" Eric looked flustered. "I didn't say we should close it right away." Madelyn hesitated for a moment before responding. "I understand Eric's point. After fighting for such a long time, I'm sure Lieutenant Nottingham must be deeply scarred, both physically and mentally. But I think we still owe it to the patients here to finish what we started. With the war nearing its end, the number of wounded soldiers will decrease, so it's best to keep the clinic open until there are no more patients left. After all, before they were patients, they were soldiers just like Lord Nottingham." Hearing this, Eric's cheeks flushed red. "Helping them return safely to their families is part of our duty too, isn't it?" he muttered shyly. Isabelle grinned at her brother's embarrassed expression. "Oh, so you only listen to Madelyn's words and ignore your own sister, is that it?" Eric tried to deflect, stammering, "Well, we should discuss this with Ian tomorrow." "Of course, you always listen to our big brother, don't you?" Isabelle teased, letting out a soft sigh. Madelyn added, "I'm very happy to hear that Lieutenant Nottingham will be back tomorrow." "Yes," Eric nodded, "but I'm afraid he'll still have to endure a lot of pain for a long time. I'll do my best to help my brother." Isabelle sighed again. "It's still better to have Yan here with us, rather than just having Eric around. Though we don't always get along, I do miss him a bit." Both Madelyn and Eric smiled at Isabelle's candid words. Despite their differences, she truly cared for her brother. The next day, Madelyn did her best to make herself look presentable. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. "Miss Renfield, the Count has arrived." "Yes, I'll be right there," she replied, standing up. However, she couldn't ignore the unease on the butler's face. Sensing his worry, Madelyn tried to reassure him. "I'm scared too, Sebastian, but we must go. I think right now, he's the one who's the most afraid." Sebastian hesitated, then bowed his head slightly in agreement. Let's go welcome him together. In front of the grand entrance of the Nottingham estate, the family and servants gathered to greet Ian's return. As the car slowly entered through the gates, everyone's anticipation grew. Madelyn couldn't hide her anxiety as the car finally stopped before them. Clack! A cane struck the ground, followed by the sound of a man's foot stepping onto the stone pavement. As the man slowly made his way forward, everyone tried to stifle their shocked expressions. Yan suddenly stumbled, and Eric called out, "Brother Yan." "Wait, Eric." Isabelle held him back gently. The soldier's hands trembled as he struggled to keep his balance with the unfamiliar cane, taking each step cautiously. Ian had truly come home, his body covered in the scars of war. He slowly approached his mother, who was crying uncontrollably. The family looked on, hearts heavy with both joy and sorrow, as they finally witnessed the return of their beloved son, Mother. It was the voice of a son who had endured countless hardships on the front lines. Finally, he had returned home safely to be with his family and feel the warmth of his mother's embrace once more. "Thank you for coming back, my son." All the servants standing behind were moved to tears. Madelyn, with her eyes brimming with emotion, suddenly heard the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps approaching her. Ian was walking towards where she stood. "Yes, Ian, come here," her heart whispered. "I've always waited for you. And now I finally know what this feeling means." She was about to say something when she saw that Ian merely walked past her, his expression cold and indifferent. He didn't utter a single word. The pain of not knowing how to face her made him choose avoidance. Meanwhile, Madelyn's heart ached deeply, but she would not turn her back on him as she did in the past life. Gathering her courage, she grabbed his arm, causing him to halt in his tracks. Ian's face was a mix of complicated emotions. He only wanted to run away from her. "Every day, I waited for you," she said, her voice trembling with tears. Her heart cried out once more, "Welcome home, Ian." My regret, my remorse. Autumn arrived, and the leaves began to fall, making way for the winter season. The girls were all excitedly preparing for the celebratory banquet. It was hard to believe that the war had truly ended. But amidst all this, Madelyn was still diligently at work. "Aren't you going to join the party? It seems like all the other nurses have gone," someone asked. Madelyn hesitated before replying, "I don't really want to attend parties. Sometimes grieving for what has been lost is better." John, unsure how to respond, murmured, "So this clinic will close once the master of the estate returns, won't it?" "I'm not sure what Lieutenant Nottingham will decide. I just hope he gives us a little more time," Madelyn answered softly. John fell silent, taken aback. "I thought you two were close?" Madelyn's heart skipped a beat at his words. I haven't really spoken to him since he got back, but that's not important. What matters more is if you've remembered anything else." R hesitated, his voice turning bitter. "It doesn't matter anymore. What use are memories to someone as ruined as I am? My family has probably abandoned me already." Madelyn gently comforted him. "No, Mr. H. I mean, John. To be honest, I've always been envious of you. The childhood memories you shared with me were so wonderful, filled with warmth and joy. They're not like my dreams at all. Every time you talked about your memories, I'd think to myself, this man must have received so much love. So, please, don't give up." "I won't give up on you either, Zian." Madelyn held the young man's hand and silently promised herself, "That's right. I won't give up on you. Not this time, Ian. Not in this life." That day, while Madelyn was busy moving medical equipment, she saw a familiar figure. "I thought there was another nurse on duty today." Madelyn jumped at the voice. "Dr. Allington. We switched shifts because she wanted to attend the banquet." Cornell looked indifferent. "I noticed that last time as well. I really don't understand her." Madelyn frowned and replied, "I'm not interested in parties. I'd rather take care of my patients than waste time on events I have no interest in." Cornell glanced at the syringe in her hand and sighed. "Miss Renfield, you're exceptionally talented as a nurse." Madelyn's heart skipped a beat, almost leaping out of her chest. His words reminded her of the past life, how he'd once said something similar, only to unknowingly push her towards a tragic death. "You're so dedicated to that badly burned soldier, but there are many aspects of you I still don't understand. Yet, all those things make you even more captivating," he added, moving closer. Suppressing her discomfort at his unwelcome closeness, Madelyn raised her voice. "If that's all you have to say, I'm taking my leave now." Suddenly, a familiar voice chimed in. Miss Renfield is truly a charming person, isn't she? As you can see, my family is very fond of her, especially my brother, Eric emphasized, his words carrying a subtle warning. Cornell smirked mockingly. I wonder, is the Lord really courting her? Eric looked puzzled. What do you mean? Cornell continued. It's been a week since he returned home, yet no one's seen him spend any time with Miss Renfield. In fact, it seems like she's closer to you, Lord Nottingham. Eric sighed. People with outdated views often think like that, don't they? My brother simply wants to be alone for now. Miss Renfield is patiently waiting for him. So please, Dr. Allington, I ask that you not concern yourself with this matter any further. Cornell sneered. Well, my speculations don't matter. If their relationship is truly strong, it will prove itself to everyone. Late at night, the sound of Ian's unsteady footsteps echoed through the grand hall. Double quotes Ian.T the sound of that familiar voice. Ian froze, like a child caught doing something wrong. What are you doing up at this hour, and without any lights on? Madelyn asked softly. Ian hesitated. I was just taking a walk. Madelyn's concern deepened. You could fall down the stairs, you know. Don't worry about me, Ian muttered, avoiding her gaze. Madelyn reached out and grasped his hand. There's a lot of medical supplies scattered around here. Let me walk with you. In the dimly lit space, the sound of his cane tapping against the floor accompanied their footsteps, moving in sync under the soft glow of candlelight. Ian hesitated before speaking, breaking the heavy silence. To be honest, I've harbored a lot of resentment towards you, he confessed. Madelyn's steps halted, and she became pensive upon hearing his words. My heart fell into a deep abyss of pain, she thought, but his broad shoulders are carrying even more anguish. Suddenly, her gentle hand touched his shoulder. Ian stopped breathing for a moment, feeling the warmth of her touch spreading through his shirt. It was in that moment that Madelyn finally recognized her true feelings and chose to open up to this man, one who had been through so much loss and suffering. How will their relationship progress from here? Please like and subscribe to the channel to follow the next part of the story.